What's up, fam? Smash the like button for the algorithm and let's get started with the story. Vire van Baskerville served as a puppet and hunting dog of the noble house of Baskerville, following all the cruelties in his life for his family and father. However, he was unjustly accused of conspiring with a demon and ruthlessly executed as a victim of betrayal. Taking his last breath, Vire decided that if he got a chance at a new life, he would no longer follow the path of a pathetic hunting dog. By some miracle, Vire opened his eyes again and saw babies lying in cribs around him. He couldn't understand where he was or what was going on around him. The constant crying of the children and the heaviness in his body led Vire to think that his possible location was hell, where his soul had gone after the execution. However, the boy soon realized that he was not in hell but in a place he knew well, the mansion of the Baskerville family, where his former life had been destroyed. Earlier, the head of the family, Hugo La Baskerville, came to the nursery and scornfully examined the infants, calling them insignificant creatures unworthy of attention. Passing by the row of cribs, the man noticed that among all these children, there was not a single worthy one who could really interest him. But suddenly he stopped at one of the cribs where there was a baby he thought was different from the others, and this baby attracted him because it was the calmest. Hugo La Baskerville then ordered his servants to carry all the infants to the cradle of blades, where each child must pass a test. Vire, who found himself in the body of an infant, quickly recognized young Hugo La Baskerville as the man who had been the main culprit of his death in his previous life. Vire was flooded with memories of the past and remembered being a Baskerville hunting dog, growing up in harsh conditions as an illegitimate child. He did the dirtiest jobs of spying on threats, also that the seventh generation of the Baskerville family would become the strongest and most powerful in history. The reason for Hugo La Baskerville's kindness was simple. He cared only for the recognition of his family and the fact that his power was unquestionable and stable. 10 years had passed since the opening of the gates of the underworld. The battle ended in victory for humanity, but Vire was betrayed and executed, putting his life on the line. Lying in his crib, the boy was seized with anger and a desire for revenge against those who had ruined him. However, as an infant, he realized that so far his chances were nil. But when he heard that the babies were going to be sent to the Cradle of Blades, he realized that this was his chance to become stronger and gain the power he lacked. The Cradle of Blades was one of the trials for the children of Baskerville, where they were thrown into a maze of sharp swords to prove their mettle. At the end of the labyrinth was the river Styx, which, according to legend, could turn a child's body into steel. However, not all babies could reach that river. To get to the river Styx the fastest, the children needed to pass directly through the dangerous barrier of spiral blades. Remembering how in his past life his own brothers had prevented him from reaching the river, Vire decided that now things would be different. Watching the ordeal, Hugo La Baskerville and the rest of the family watched in amazement as one of the children was able to pass through the swords and jump into the Styx. While in the water, Vire decided that he would stay there as long as possible to receive the blessing of the river Styx, for its waters changed his body down to the bones. As the air began to run out, Vire began to feel unbearable pain but decided to endure it to get all the power the river could give him. Mr. Hugo's servants became concerned, fearing that the boy might not survive if he stayed in the water too long, and offered to get him out. Hugo went to the manager, John Barrymore, and asked how long the child had been in the river, to which he replied that it had been about 7 minutes. The head of the Baskerville family assumed that Vire would not be able to get out, but when he came to the water and saw him, he ordered his son to swim to the surface. Hearing his voice, Vire decided not to give up and drank as much water from the river as he could to absorb all the power of the Styx available to him at that moment. His breathing began to falter, but Vire continued to think only of how to stay underwater as long as possible, despite the hellish pain. When Hugo pulled his son out of the water, he was very surprised that the child had not just dipped into the water for strength, but had decided to absorb it to become stronger. Hugo then asked Supervisor Barrymore what the name of the child he was holding was, and the man replied that the child's name was Vire van Baskerville. Looking at the unconscious boy, the head of the clan noted that his son was born determined and greedy for power, which clearly set him apart from other children. The boy decided to follow a secret path to build up his strength and power so that at the decisive moment, he could eliminate Hugo and put an end to his long suffering. Vire van Baskerville vowed to wipe the house of Baskerville off the face of the earth with his own hands to avenge all that happened to him in his past life. In his past life, it was known to many that the illegitimate son of Hugo La Baskerville possessed outstanding talents and incredible abilities. Already at the age of 8, the boy was dubbed a genius for his high merits, although in his family he still continued to be considered a common and second-rate child. By the age of 20, Vire had begun to fulfill the tasks of spying and eliminating all undesirables, but this did not rid him of his feelings of inferiority. By opening the gates to the underworld in his 30s, Vire caused an invasion of demons that he fought, destroying those by the hundreds, which led to the conclusion of the great battle. However, at the age of 40, Vire was rewarded for his devotion as a hunting dog, but his reward was false accusations and execution by guillotine. Upon opening his eyes, Vire realized that he was back in the crib in the nursery. Hence, his ordeal in the river Styx had been quite successful. Rolling over onto his stomach, Vire realized that his new start in this life was better than the previous one, giving him an advantage he didn't have before. Suddenly, a strange woman entered the room with a beautiful box in her hands. The nanny asked the woman for what purpose she had brought the box to Vire's cradle. Without answering, the lady left the box and exited the room. Afterward, Vire thought that gifts were never given to illegitimate children and suspected something was wrong. Left alone with the box, the boy saw a bloody mamba crawling out of it, and this poisonous snake headed straight for him, preparing to strike. Looking at the snake, Vire remembered that only a few women of the Baskerville family were given the title of My Lady, and realized that this was an attempt on his life. Assuming that all the children in the cradle could be harmed, the boy decided to confront the snake before him to prevent tragedy in that room. Vire was the first to attack, grabbing 2 snakes by the heads to mercilessly disarm them, for he had sworn that he would destroy all who stood in his way. The next day, the servants of the Baskerville family came to Vire's cradle and were astonished to find the child sleeping under the bodies of torn, breathless snakes. Looking into the cradle, the servants saw the peacefully sleeping baby, who was in no way bothered by the remnants of the poisonous creatures. Rumors about him quickly spread. That same day, all the nannies working the night shift were subjected to brutal interrogations, but it was impossible to find out how the snakes ended up in the baby's cradle. Only Vire knew the truth about what had happened that night, and he wasn't going to share that information with anyone around him. 8 years had passed since that incident, and Vire sat in class with the other children, listening intently to the teacher, who began to explain the topic of sword masters. Looking at the students, the teacher talked about the classification of swordsmen, saying that beginners don't know how to use mana, while experts can control it. The teacher went on to explain that graduates were already able to emit liquid aura from their swords, while masters could turn mana into a solid substance. Masters, on the other hand, were those people who were able to alter mana and control it as they wished, making them some of the strongest swordsmen of all. Then the teacher noted that Hugo La Baskerville was a master of the sword, which amazed the students very much because such people were very rare. Realizing that Hugo already possessed incredible strength, Vire decided that he needed to urgently regain his strength to be ready for the upcoming battle. Suddenly, the teacher noticed that Vire was thinking and was once again convinced that the boy who had received the gifts of the river Styx stood out from the other students. Looking at him, the teacher thought that Hugo would be happy about his son's development if he knew about it, but the boy was thinking about how soon he would be able to eliminate his father. At the same moment, 3 boys looked at Vire angrily, and it was obvious that their intentions were not friendly. After class, the trio took Vire to the storeroom and, calling him a half-breed, claimed to know of his bastardy and began to humiliate him. The boys also mentioned that he was rumored to have spent 7 minutes in the river Styx, and that while still an infant, he was able to destroy poisonous snakes in the cradle. Looking at these tomboys, Vire remembered that they had haunted him in his past life and that it was they who had bullied him after the false accusations. The brothers' names were High Bro, Middle Bro, and Low Bro, and they were known as Hugo La Baskerville's Trident, each 1 year older than Vire. The boys accused Vire of lying and said that he did not like them. Realizing that friendship with them would not be possible in this life, he decided to eliminate them. Suddenly, one of the brothers held a knife to Vire's face, saying that if his body was really like steel, he would be safe from being stabbed. Brother High Bro beckoned to Low Bro, and he immediately knew what to do, quickly grabbing Vire and blocking his breath, intending to abuse him. Vire immediately assessed the level of their cruelty, and made sure that the rumors about them were true. These annoying brothers knew no mercy. After 3 minutes, the brothers were worried, for they did not believe in the delusional legend of the river Styx, and were sure that the boy would not last long. But even after 10 minutes, Vire continued to hold on, and the brothers were horrified at what was happening. Realizing that the legend was true, they began to panic. Low Bro, who continued to hold the boy, refused to believe in the veracity of the legend and did not want to let go of him. But Vire also continued to stand still, realizing their precarious position. In the situation, the brothers asked Low Bro to let Vire go because there was no point in their actions anymore. Letting go of the boy, Low Bro suddenly realized something terrible had happened and looked at his hand in horror, screaming in terrible pain. Vire immediately grabbed his hand, and when the brothers asked him what he had done to Low Bro, he immediately spat out their brother's finger, wiping the blood from his face. Vire smiled wickedly and reminded them that it was the brothers who first got to him and started using dirty methods. However, the two brothers said they were not afraid of Vire, but Low Bro was not so confident in his abilities because he had lost a finger and was very scared. The brothers didn't take it for granted to support Low Bro and said they would later go to the priest to have the finger put back in place, but Vire said they wouldn't leave. One of the brothers was angry at the words Vire had spoken and immediately attacked him with a knife, trying to punish him for his insolence, shouting that Vire was a year younger than them and trying to show his superiority. His brother stabbed Vire in the stomach. However, the attack was useless, as the knife only cut Vire's clothes but did not do any damage to him thanks to the effect of the river Styx. After knocking the knife out of the boy's hand and breaking him, Vire reminded him that in the Baskerville family, age is of no importance, for strength and talent are more important. Looking angrily at his opponent, and not letting go of his hand, the boy offered to have fun, hinting at a continuation. The frightened brother cried out in fright, asking if the rumors of his power were true, but he never got an answer from Vire. Deciding not to explain anything to the boy, Vire immediately struck a strong blow to the boy's face, knocking him to the floor. The brothers froze in fear as they saw High Bro collapsed on the floor with a broken nose, worried for their lives and not understanding what they should do next. But one of the brothers decided not to hold back his rage and prepared to avenge his injured brother, clenching his fists and ready for a fight. Before Middlebro could even lift a finger, Vire had already knocked him to the floor with a single leg kick, leaving him with no chance to retaliate. Realizing that Vire was not joking, the brothers screamed in fear, but the boy told them not to worry because they would be fine once they were treated. Picking up one of the brothers' knives from the floor, Vire said he wouldn't let them out of the room anytime soon, and if they resisted, they would be left crippled. Holding the knife in his hands, the boy still decided to change the rules of his game, saying that he would be magnanimous and let one of the brothers out of the room. The frightened brothers asked which of them he would let out, but Vire threw a knife in front of them and hinted that it was up to them to decide among themselves. Leaving the room, the boy turned around and said that he wasn't going to wait long, and that they should decide sooner if they wanted any of them alive. The brothers looked at each other apprehensively, and began to argue, for they really thought that only one of them would be able to get out of the room alive. Standing outside the door, Vire listened to the brothers fight, and was glad that he had been able to sow discord in such a friendly and unbreakable trident of Baskerville. Sometime later, Barrymore was giving an account to Hugo of the ruby mines, where the bloodshed of the Morgue family had taken place for those claiming ownership. Hugo replied that Morgue would soon come to the negotiations and asked if there was any more news, to which Barrymore replied that Vire had won first place in the calligraphy contest. The head of the family was pleasantly surprised by this news and his son's success, and asked the superintendent when the school children would have their practical test. Barrymore responded that the tests would take place in 5 days and that right now the young knights were on a mission trip preparing for those visibly nervous. The steward also informed Hugo of the recent big fight that had taken place among his descendants in the palace. Hearing this, Hugo was very surprised and asked the manager if there were any casualties in the situation. The man replied that there were no casualties, but that High Bro lost his teeth, Middle Bro had his jaw damaged, and Low Bro had lost the index finger on his left hand. The manager said that treatment was provided, but the brothers had psychological traumas. The head asked how it happened to those who were very friendly. Barrymore surprised Hugo by answering that it was because of the winner of the calligraphy contest, Vire, who brought the brothers to this state. The boy was then called into Hugo's office to discuss the fight, and he was very calm and ready to be questioned by his father. Upon seeing the boy, the head said that he had grown a lot, and Vire greeted his father, calling him Mr., which surprised him. Looking at Vire, Hugo said that he had heard that he had hurt the 3 brothers, to which the boy replied that he had heard that they had been treated. The head looked at his son and said that the problem lay in the boy's mental traumas because since that moment, the brothers no longer communicated. They were told that the 3 brothers did well in their exams, but they stopped eating together and talking, and the relationship between them soured after that incident. Hugo asked Vire if he thought his behavior was inappropriate because it was because of him that the quarrel had started, but the boy would not admit his guilt. Vire confidently stated that he considered himself much stronger than his brothers and did not admit his guilt because strong people do not make mistakes. The man then asked his son if he felt guilty because the brothers had recently visited him and said they forgave the boy generously. Vire smiled haughtily at hearing the words of forgiveness and remembered an incident from his past life. In the past, the last surviving daughter of the Baskerville family, being a nun, came to Hugo and told him that she forgave him for all his sins. Hugo looked at her with contempt and cruelty and answered her words with that single phrase, with a crazed look. Vire uttered the very phrase Hugo had said. Forgiveness is just an excuse for weak people who are incapable of revenge. Hearing his son's words, the head immediately recognized the motto of the Baskerville family and praised the boy for remembering this important truth. With that, Hugo smiled contentedly and turned to Barrymore with orders, pointing to Vire. He told him to bring him any snacks he wanted but warned his son not to be greedy and take as many as he could carry. The boy thanked his father, calling him Mr. again, and asked if he could have the chocolate. Then Vire and Barrymore headed for the exit, but suddenly Hugo addressed the boy again, calling him son. Looking after the boy, the man wished him good luck and told him to do well in the upcoming midterm exam. In conclusion, Hugo smiled and said that Vire had no right to lose to his relatives, but Vire did not consider the words of the head sincere because he understood that he was treated as a consumable. He clenched his teeth in anger and said that he would try. Soon, Barrymore and Vire arrived at the warehouse where the chocolate was stored, which was enjoyed by the female gourmet of the Morgue family. After looking at the shelves, the manager said that it was hard to get such a product, but Vire replied that he didn't want ready-made processed chocolate. Turning and looking at the cooks, the boy asked for the most flavorful cocoa beans to be brought to him. Manager Barrymore and the cooks looked at Vire in surprise, not understanding why he needed beans. Soon, the boy was brought a bag of red-flavored beans known as blood beans. While Vire tasted the beans, the cook told him that this kind of bean was very flavorful and that just one piece could make up to 100 liters of chocolate. Barrymore didn't notice the boy's bitterness and decided that he just liked chocolate so much that he ate the bitter beans raw. Looking at the boy, the manager thought that he was really an unusual and exceptional person for choosing only beans, although he could have taken something more valuable. The cook then asked if the beans needed to be processed for Vire, but the boy said he would take them as they were. Fixing his glasses, Barrymore thought that Vire had a rather strange preference for his age since children usually like sweet chocolate. However, the boy did not need the beans for consumption because he was going to use them for a practical test that would take place in 5 days. Vire already knew that on this particular day, something unprecedented and something no one expected would happen in the Baskerville family. The Baskerville family was known around the world as the Berserk family because of the harsh upbringing their children were subjected to from an early age to develop physical strength. Children had to run up steep hills and were not allowed to rest or sleep before a set time to adapt to the harsh conditions. The cave, he would be able to claim the treasure. Instead, he was haunted by the guilt of his actions and the loss of his brother. The letter ended with a warning to future generations about the dangers of greed and the consequences of betrayal. Vire, deeply affected by the story, realized the weight of the legacy he was inheriting. He understood that the allure of the treasure could lead to dire consequences, just as it had for Gain and Abel. With a newfound sense of purpose, Vire decided that he would not let greed dictate his actions. Instead, he would use the knowledge and power he gained to protect others and honor the memory of those who had come before him. As he stood in the glowing hall, Vire felt a surge of determination. He would not only seek the treasures of the dungeon but also ensure that he would leave it with his integrity intact. With that thought in mind, he approached the glowing ruby, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that he would do so with honor and courage. This cave, he still didn't get what he wanted. After much regret, the man decided to leave this dungeon and leave a message to his descendants to protect them from a similar fate that befell him. Gain strongly advised to get out of this dungeon at once because this bloody lair only mocks people who will get nothing here. Disappointed, Fakir realized that the man meant to say that he had come all the way here and was left with nothing, but he didn't have a twin brother. Then the boy thought that the essence of the assignment did not change from this, and most likely Gain and Abel did not decipher the assignment correctly. As Vire continued to think hard about this task, he was sure that there were no impassable dungeons. As he approached the skeleton, a shadow reflected from its body. Then he realized what the answer was and how stupid the brothers had been. Because they were two of them, they were stereotyped and couldn't come to a decision. The correct answer to the question was in the postmonial itself, with a light-colored stone cave contrasting with the dark corridor on the way to the cave. The man is swallowed up by the darkness in the corridor, but upon entering the cave, he encounters the light of the ruby and splits into two, casting his shadow. When darkness falls again, the last level of the stone cave is opened, and recognizing that the answer was a shadow, the boy broke the ruby with his hand. After Vire shattered the red stone, the shards of it floated up and began to emit a mysterious energy, and a bright red-pink light. Looking in front of him, Vire realized that it was the relic of the Devil's Lair that had caused the brothers to fight and risk each other's lives. From the shards arose a mysterious sword called Beelzebub, and on the pedestal, it was stated that only a man of the Baskerville family would be able to pull it out. When he saw the sword, Vire wondered if it was an artifact for remembering his past life. As a child, he had seen references to it in the pages of a mythical book. According to ancient myths, the voracious fly Beelzebub was an unprecedented demonic monster that invaded the continent. It was said that the world had been swallowed up by a terrible demonic constellation known to all as the Seven Great Disasters. Then the heads of the 7 clans opposed to prevent the 7 great calamities, and each of them dealt with a demonic constellation. The demonic constellation with which Fade, the head of the Baskerville family, was exactly the constellation of gluttony called Beelzebub. The remains of the defeated Beelzebub were kept in the estate of the Baskerville family, and based on legend, it was said that these remains could summon other demons. In the end, the legend was true, and the sword fell into the wrong hands, causing a great number of people to fall on the battlefield. Grasping the hilt of the sword, Vire said that this would not happen in this life, for this sword would now be his property. Suddenly, the sword turned into streams of infernal energy, and having lost its physical shell, enveloped the hand of the boy who had not expected such a turn of events. The energy began to ebb and flow into Vire's body and was soon completely consumed by it. Then, a demonic sword that was one with his body emerged from the boy's hand. Upon reuniting with the weapon, Vire rejoiced that this sword was made from the demonic constellation Beelzebub, and realized that he was very lucky to get his hands on it. Looking at the sword and rejoicing in his success, the boy wondered how strong one could become in this life with this weapon. Looking around carefully, Vire realized that there was nothing else of value in the cave, and it was time for him to leave. Suddenly, the boy felt something strange, for inexplicable things began to happen to his body. As he fell to the floor, Vire couldn't understand what he was feeling at the moment, for it was like intense hunger and dizziness at the same time. The demonic sword that had penetrated the boy's hand began to make eerie sounds, begging to be fed. At last, the exhausted boy got out of the cave, but a terrible hunger continued to disturb him, and his sense of smell increased because of his appetite. Suddenly, the sword possessed Vire's hand and pointed it in the direction from where the smell of food was coming from. The boy, unable to fight Beelzebub and influenced by it, headed down the path he had been given. Soon, the demonic weapon led him to the lifeless body of a hellhound, whom the boy had eliminated a little earlier. Beelzebub immediately pointed his blade at the monster's body and began sucking the blood of the one, and at that moment, the boy's damaged organs began to recover. Vire suggested that the soil and trees of Red Mountain might have dried up because of Beelzebub's hunger, and now it was necessary to quench his thirst because they depended on each other. Soon, Beelzebub was satiated, and one of the sword slots filled with Hellhound's blood, and the boy realized that he possessed a secret skill. There were rumors that Beelzebub had the ability to absorb enemy skills, and the scale of his absorption was close to infinity, so many people were deprived of their skills. However, at the moment, the number of skills that could be acquired was limited to 3, and the first one was Hellhound's skills. After realizing this and seeing it for himself, the boy understood that he could now adopt the skills of other creatures. Then Vire looked unseeingly at the nearby lifeless body of Cerberus, also fallen by his hand. In the next second, sensing the presence of food, the demonic sword reasserted itself and headed towards Cerberus's body to drink his blood. Sighing heavily, the boy told Beelzebub that he should not eat the monster whole because if the body was damaged, it would be difficult to explain what happened to his prey. Seeing that the demonic sword wasn't going to stop in devouring blood, Vire struck at Beelzebub and ordered him to finish his meal. Then the boy saw that all 3 slots were filled. One had Hellhound's blood in it, the second had Cerberus's burn skill, and the third had fast regeneration. When Vire saw the rat lying under the monster's body, he realized that its fast regeneration had come from the demon's sword that drank its blood during Cerberus's takeover. After picking up the rat by the tail, Vire realized that the burn skill he had picked up from Cerberus was quite useful because one of the worst kinds of pain for humans was burning. Looking at Cerberus's body, the boy thought that most likely the monsters for the test had already been prepared and it was worth waiting for the test to be completed since he had already done the task. Soon, the practical test was completed, and all the wounded and tired young men went back to the Baskerville family mansion. But the test was not over, and some of the bodies of the monsters that had fallen during the test were turned into shields and swords and given to the participants as trophies. One of the bodies brought in by the young hunting dog horrified all the Baskervilles present. This shocking information reached Mr. Hugo Law Baskerville, who could not believe his ears. Barrymore reported to the head that the 8-year-old Mr. Vire had crossed the boundary of the safe zone and then attacked Cerberus with a high threat level. The manager added that the monster had been eliminated as it had originally been badly injured by the barbarians, and then poisoned by the boy using a strong poison. No one knew where Vire got the poison from, and he didn't give any more details, saying that he was tired and went straight to the dormitory. Hugo smiled, thinking that at such a young age, the boy already knew how to lie, but at the same time, he had information, and information was a power that had a price. Barrymore was surprised that such a talented boy was born to an ordinary woman and a prefix to the surname Van and not Law, as the head. To which Hugo replied that he did not know. Hugo said that he is different from the previous heads of the family, and when breeding hunting dogs, he does not look at the pedigree of those because the main thing is talent and courage. Barrymore thought that the head might be so worried about his second son, who, as a pure blood, was not distinguished by these qualities and was already preparing for isolation training. After this conversation, Hugo ordered the young Vire to be summoned to his office, and he soon arrived at his door. Hugo said he was aware that Vire had eliminated Cerberus on the interim test, and asked how the boy had managed to do it. Keeping calm, Vire replied that he did it thanks to the chocolate he put down Cerberus's throat because it is poison for dog-like monsters. Listening to Hugo's speech, who realized that Vire had asked to be given chocolate for that reason, Barrymore thought that the head was doing a bad thing by pelting his son with such questions. Looking menacingly at the boy, the head of the clan asked him why he had not answered questions about the attack on the monster earlier. Looking intently at Hugo, the boy said he would answer only to his master, and no one else. The man asked Vire who his master was, to which the boy replied that being part of the Baskerville family, he considered his master to be the head of the Hugo family. Hugo was pleased with the boy's words and said he would give him all the monster bodies from his hunt at the exam and anything else he wanted as a reward for first place. Realizing that he could get what he wanted, Vire decided to use this opportunity and said he wanted to go to Manson's library. Much to the surprise of Hugo and Barrymore, this library was a huge repository of books located in the center of the Baskerville family mansion and ranked at the top of the entire empire. Hugo asked how the boy dared to ask this, knowing that only blood relatives of the head or heads of the clan could enter. Without abandoning the thought of sneaking in there secretly, Vire replied that he was willing to retreat if the head wouldn't allow it. Suddenly, however, Hugo agreed and sent him to the deepest part of the library to read a book called The Six Fangs of the Baskerville. Vire was amazed because previously none of the illegitimate second-rate children of the family were allowed to read this book, and could not even reach the 4th level. The boy realized that he had level 6 in the past, and the head was now at level 7, but the Hugo from his past life could bear as many as 9 fangs. Vire couldn't forget how despised he had been in his previous life because of his bloodline, so in this life, he was determined to surpass Hugo. The boy realized that he now had the opportunity to receive a study guide from the head of the rural generation of Baskerville, who had defeated the 7 disasters. Looking at his son with excitement, Hugo Law Baskerville ordered the boy not to fail his expectations, for it was he who had given this rare opportunity to Vire, implying that the chapter had not yet realized the value of the other books in the library. The boy looked at the man and said he would try to live up to the expectations. After talking to Hugo Law Baskerville, the boy went to the mansion library, and as he approached the doors of that library, he saw 2 guards in front of the entrance. Walking through the library doors for the first time, Vire was overwhelmed with unimaginable emotions and found it hard to believe that this was happening in reality. As he approached the bookshelves and saw the titles, the boy realized that here were many books he had wanted to study in his past life. The Baskervilles' policy was not to allow future hunting dogs to bare their fangs to their master, so second-grade offspring were not allowed to exceed the 4th level of swordsmanship. Finally, Vire found the book he needed, which was chained and guarded like a treasure. Taking out the key that opens this book, the boy said that he never dreamed of such a thing in the past and never thought that Hugo would recommend a book about the 6 fangs. Turning the key in the keyhole, Vire assumed that Hugo might think that a child of 8 would not read the entire book in a day and so allowed it. Having studied levels 1 through 4 of swordsmanship in his past life, the boy had never been able to create a 5th fang without true knowledge of the 5th level. The sword arts of this kind were divided into levels. The first level was the first fang, and so on, and the appearance of fangs was accompanied by a black color. However, Vire was not interested in level 6. His real purpose for coming to the mansion library was something else entirely, for he longed for a higher level. Soon, the boy came to the entrance of the library where the guards were standing, and they looked at him in surprise, asking him if he was going to leave the place. Then they told him that the sword manuals were deep inside, and if the boy forgot something, they could bring him the right book. Vire replied that he wanted to read a few more books before he left, so the guards could ignore him and go about their business. Seeing the boy heading for the 2nd floor where there were only collections, the guards said that given the opportunity, it would be better for him to read books on sword wielding. The guards looked at him and said that the boy obviously didn't realize the value of the books yet, and Vire was glad to hear that the guards had succumbed to their delusion. In fact, among these many dusty collections was an incredible treasure that the guards didn't even know about. Going up to the 2nd floor and examining the books there, Vire finally noticed something interesting that caught his eye. Pulling out an old and tattered book with intricate letters on the cover, the boy realized he had found the book he was looking for, titled Hidden Ambush. This was a book of the basics of the first level of swordsmanship that even the native children of the family wouldn't see, but because of some torn out pages, it's not really important anymore. Flipping through the pages of the book and smiling wickedly, Vire looked contentedly at the one, for he knew its true value. In a past life, a squad of Vire's hounds found a strange artifact in a dungeon that was located on the border of Red Black Mountain. This artifact was a passage from a sword manual. One of the torn pages was written in Baskerville's handwriting. When Hugo sensed that this was no ordinary leaf, he turned over the entire mansion library to find the corresponding book, that is, the Hidden Ambush. Perhaps this book was created by one of Baskerville's ancestors and describes a way to reach the 10th level of swordsmanship. Eager to reach the 10th level, Hugo unleashed his hunting dogs and found the location of the remaining 6 pages torn from this book. These pages were in 6 families like the Baskerville family, and Hugo declared war on these families by releasing hunting dogs to fight against their enemies. The hound dogs managed to deliver the remaining pages to Hugo, but this was possible because they sacrificed a huge number of hounds. The reward for his work was a single phrase from Hugo, who said that the hunting dogs had handled it well without regretting their losses at all. Remembering this, Vire resented how miserable his past life had been, for Hugo had managed to move from the 7th to the 9th level at the cost of the lives of many dogs. The boy was determined not to let that happen in this life because he was the dog who had found all the pages and knew their contents, and now he had access to the book. Reading the lines about the first step to the 10th level coinciding with the solar eclipse, Vire thought that the person reading it would find the book pointless. However, if you put the information of the book together with what is written from the torn-out pages, the content of the book begins to add up to a puzzle, creating a marvelous masterpiece. The boy decided to reach his former strength before the age of 15 because in his past life he was a graduate of the elementary level, and now he wanted to have the highest level. Studying this important book diligently, Vire didn't notice how quickly the time flew by, and the darkness outside the windows was replaced by bright light, and morning came abruptly. Closing the textbook, the boy decided that he had read enough, so it was time to call it a day and leave the mansion library. Seeing that it was a new day, Vire realized that he had spent the whole day reading, but he was able to read the whole book and memorize all the necessary information. Rising from the floor, the boy did not feel the presence of guards and realized that no one would interfere with him, and he could test his new knowledge. Vire realized that he could not acquire all 10 fangs in such a young body, but at least there was a chance to reach the 5th level not available to him in his previous life. Born a bastard son in a previous life, Vire's relatives condemned him for his lack of swordsmanship without regard to his merit. Not wanting to live such a life again, the boy opened all his fangs and concentrated all his strength to open the 5th fang and attack the imaginary opponent. Of course, in the place of his opponent, he imagined the appearance of Hugo La Baskerville, wishing with all his soul to dissect him with his whipping and powerful blows. Resentment and anger fueled Vire, and thanks to this and the new knowledge he had gained, the boy was able to increase his power level, and he struck the most powerful blow. When the boy finished practicing his new attacks, streams of powerful aura still lingered behind him. Looking at his hands, the boy realized that despite his current weakness, he had still managed to bear his 5th fang as he had wanted. Vire was insanely happy and was even ready to cry with joy because he finally managed to reach the 5th level of the Baskerville family. Suddenly, the boy realized that his hunting dog's fangs were growing, heading towards Hugo at a speed unprecedented in the history of Baskerville. Now, after such success, Vire had to gain mana, and then he would be able to rise higher than in his previous life. Looking at his hand, the boy realized that his mana amount had also continued to increase after the training, and it was most likely due to the experience he had gained. The liquid aura enveloping his hand signified the level of graduate level obtaining. The boy had reached the entry-level graduate level at the age of 8, when in the past he had only reached it at the age of 30. The graduate level differed from his past expert level, with an aura changing from gaseous to liquid form and having a higher density. Realizing that his sword level had also become higher than in his previous life, Vire was determined not to stop and reach the limitless 10th level. Now, Vire's attack called Piercing Fang could become much stronger and much faster, but it still had limitations in development. Compared to it, the attack called Hidden Ambush had a perfect level of swordsmanship, combining defense and attack without any limitations. Putting the book on the windowsill, Vire thought that he could rise to a mid-level graduate with a high probability if he only decided to do so. However, there was one problem that only consisted of the need to hide the skills from the head of the Hugo Loss family for a long time. Taking something out of his pocket, Vire realized that he must not appear too weak or too strong to get rid of Hugo's scrutiny. This object in Vire's pocket turned out to be a magnifying glass with which the boy projected a ray of sunlight onto the book and set it on fire. The book flashed instantly, and the boy made sure that in this way neither Hugo nor his hunting dogs could reach the 10th level. At the moment of burning the book, the guards suddenly approached the boy, and hearing a strange odor, they asked him where the smell of burning came from. Vire did not hesitate and replied that he had accidentally left the magnifying glass on the book and it had burned, and if it was necessary to report it, he would tell the manager himself. A conflict arose when the guards expressed relief that there were only old collections and admitted it was their fault for not keeping an eye on them. Vire deliberately stated that this collection was not useful and suggested that Barrymore should not be disturbed by it, as he was dealing with the question of the morgue mines. The guards replied that if the boy turned a blind eye to it, they would do the same and pretend the book didn't exist in the library. Heading for the exit, Vire apologized for the inconvenience, and said it would be their little secret, to which the guards readily agreed. Once the boy left, the guards remarked that Mr. Vire was a very good man because he was in their position as servants, and did not want to stir up conflict. Vire was glad that the guards did not investigate the circumstances of the incident with the book and simply took his word for it, not wanting to be punished. After leaving the library, the boy arrived with his report in the head's office, where Hugo asked Vire if he had benefited from the trip to the Manson library. The boy replied that it was probably good for him, and looking at his son with interest, the man smiled and asked how he felt being in the library. After a moment of thought, Vire replied that he felt something sharp, soft, warm, and tiring at the same time. Hugo and Barrymore were surprised to hear this, as what Vire described seemed to suggest he might have sensed an aura. Aura was proving to be fully immersed in the world of blades. However, even the smartest students must constantly work to reach at least the entry level by age 15. Looking intently at Vire, Hugo did not understand what he expected from this 8-year-old and told the boy to demonstrate his skills. Smiling broadly, Vire replied that he would be happy to demonstrate his skills to the head of the Baskerville clan. After the conversation, all participants went to the training arena, where a large number of spectators were seated in the stands. Once in the arena, Vire looked confident and drew his sword, preparing for a showdown. Watching the boy, Barrymore asked Hugo how he decided to test Vire, and the man replied that he wanted him to kill a suitable monster. Hugo Law Baskerville had prepared the hungriest and most aggressive monster for the boy, and at that moment, the gate behind which the creature was held opened. A huge, sinister monster was brought out of the cage to face Vire, restrained by a large number of bulky chains. This brutal creature was an orc of medium threat level C, who looked at the boy with hatred, waiting to tear him to shreds. The students watching were horrified to see such a fierce opponent, as such a terrifying monster was too dangerous for an 8-year-old child. However, if Vire could not handle this monster, the knights would have to help eliminate the orc, who was half the height of the boy. When the opponents saw each other in person, Hugo ordered the orc to be released and the battle to begin. In the next moment, the large and heavy chains straining the monster's entire body were removed, allowing it to move freely within the arena. When the aggressive and angry orc felt free, it became furious and looked at its opponent with hateful eyes. The next second, the dangerous monster rushed to attack Vire, who stood his ground without fear. The orc swung at the boy, but before he knew it, Vire had used his sword and severed the orc's arm. All the students and spectators were shocked by Vire's fighting skills, as he was able to injure this monster so severely with the first strike. Even the orc itself did not expect such an outcome, and roared in sharp pain at the loss of its limb. Vire continued to attack his opponent, striking the monster's legs with another blow. The orc's foot struck the boy with a precise kick, causing him to fall to the ground. As the sinister monster could no longer stand, the boy thought that this time the orc's fast regeneration skill wouldn't be able to work. This would not happen thanks to the boy's use of the Hellhound skill from the second sword slot, which exceeded the orc's recovery power by many times. The audience was amazed by the abilities of the 8-year-old boy, as such power was impossible without the use of mana, and they could not understand how he had such abilities. Gazing intently at the boy, Hugo was also very shocked by his son's skills. Vire looked at Hugo and decided to show the man what he had longed for, the skills he had learned in the Manson library. Vire's newly acquired skill, which he unexpectedly exposed to the spectators in the arena, turned out to be the Aura Blade. At that moment, a snarling and weakened orc, seeking revenge on its opponent, began to rise from the ground to attack the boy. The monster's eyes burned with anger and bloodlust, and it roared loudly, alerting Vire to the danger he was in. However, the boy rushed to attack the monster while applying his new skill called Aura Blade. Watching the fight, a shocked Barrymore remarked that Vire was a rare genius because he had the aura of an entry-level sword expert, which surprised Hugo. The manager was sure that such a genius would not be found in any other clan, but Hugo was concerned and ordered him to stop this reasoning. Barrymore then noticed that this orc was very strange, as it couldn't even stop bleeding with its regeneration. Hugo replied that this was the reason the boy was able to defeat the orc, and the manager realized that the man just didn't want to praise Vire. As they were talking, the boy turned his gaze to them and interrupted to make a request that surprised the head of the family. With a bright smile on his face, the boy asked if Hugo had anyone stronger than this orc so he could show off all his skills and abilities in battle. Hearing Vire's words, the spectators in the stands were horrified, as they had not expected such results from the boy and were unprepared for him to ask for a stronger opponent. As he waited for the head's reply, Vire thought it was better to show the allowed part of his powers, as someone might notice his skills and he might have a chance to get away from Hugo. The boy realized that he had a chance of being sent to a distant district, or academy. Thinking over Vire's words, tension flickered across Hugo's face as he said that obviously orcs from faraway places were not up to his son's level, and at this age, the boy's skills needed to be developed. Hugo was pleased with his son's eagerness and asked Barrymore about the availability of creatures captured for the barbarian's subjugation experiment. The manager replied that there was only one individual left, warning that the monster had been hungry for a long time and had become even more aggressive because of it. Nevertheless, Hugo ordered the creature to be brought into the arena. Seeing this creepy creature, the boys in the stands were horrified, as they had never encountered such foul monsters in person before. Vire, on the contrary, raised his head with great interest and regarded the new monster without a drop of fear. Before the boy appeared a huge, dangerous, and cruel troll shrouded in chains and 10 times larger than Vire himself. Without taking his eyes off the monster, Vire asked Hugo if he could proceed to start the battle, and the leader coldly replied that he didn't care and allowed him to proceed. In the next second, the troll, freed from its shackles, rushed towards the boy. Vire did not hesitate and attacked the monster. The aggressive creature struck first, shattering everything around it, and causing a cloud of dust to rise. Vire, meanwhile, used his agility and speed to dodge the blow and found himself behind the creepy troll's back. The monster didn't have time to realize where the boy had disappeared to, and Vire distanced himself and took a defensive stance. The audience shouted in frustration that Vire had missed a great opportunity to attack the troll from behind but had hesitated and lost the chance. However, Hugo praised the boy's actions, saying that this maneuver was a good decision. At that moment, Vire knew that trolls have excellent regeneration abilities, so inflicting light and non-fatal wounds on an enemy wastes their strength. This is why hunting trolls requires special strategic skills, and the boy was quite good at it. Skillfully dodging the attacks, the troll soon stopped to rest, as it was already exhausted. After seeing the boy's decisive actions, the audience thought he was truly a genius, as at such a young age he could think of tactics to fight such a monster. A bit exhausted, Vire realized that the troll was too slow and not a threat, but at the same time, he needed to put on a little show. Vire needed to eliminate the monster as naturally as possible because if he unleashed all his powers, he was bound to get into trouble. Thus, the best option was to use the troll's power against itself, and the boy did just that. The very next moment, Vire successfully executed this maneuver and remained unharmed while his opponent collapsed to the ground with a loud crack. During his attack, the boy also managed to deliver a powerful sword strike and wounded his opponent badly, causing the latter to howl loudly in hellish pain. Everyone watched the fight tensely, amazed that Vire was able to wound a troll with only a first-level skill when no other 8-year-old was capable of such a thing. When the boy heard this conversation, he thought it was due to Bab's ability, as it would have been impossible to do so with only the first level. At this point, the head said that Vire could stop fighting and not put himself in danger, but the boy replied that he would not stop because he was almost done. Resolutely looking at his opponent, Vire asked to wait a little longer, and soon the outcome of the battle would be clear. The boy also said that he would accept his defeat on the condition that he could not eliminate the troll during the next attack, which puzzled Hugo. After looking at the furious monster and appreciating the confidence and fortitude of his son, the head of the Baskerville family agreed to continue the fight. Raising his sword and centering his aura around it, the boy already knew how much power he could bear. Before the audience, Vire was fully prepared for the monster's attack and wanted to show everyone the scenario of gaining enlightenment during the duel and moving to the next level. In the next moment, the boy exposed the amount of power he needed in front of everyone, and he was especially interested in how Hugo would react to it. With his sword held firmly in his hand, Vire attacked the troll with all the power concentrated in his weapon and took its head off in a second. Seeing the finale of the boy's battle with the troll, Manager Barrymore and all the spectators in the stands were simply amazed and speechless. The lives of the Baskervilles are formed from their sword, and usually, hunting dogs under 15 only reach the first level. After 15, the sword is filled with mana and emits an aura. However, for the first time in the history of the family, an unusual young man was born who was able to reach the second level at the age of 8, while his brothers could only reach it at the age of 18. Smiling happily, Vyre laughed and was pleased that he had managed to defeat the troll and mislead everyone about his true strength. But even this percentage of strength shown to Hugo La Baskerville had left him shocked and horrified. Looking at his son and the monster he had defeated, the man couldn't believe that a boy with no good bloodline could achieve such success at such a young age. It had been a week since Vyre had shown himself in the arena in front of Hugo and the rest of the audience, and now he was sitting in the dining room eating lunch, reluctantly looking at his plate. The boy thought that no matter how much he ate this chowder, he still couldn't get used to it. Noticing how everyone was avoiding him, Vyre realized that after that day, everyone was wary of him, but for such a strong young man in the Baskerville clan, it was only natural. The boy continued to recall with pleasure the expression on Hugo's face, who had frozen for a moment at what he saw and did not notice or hear anything around him. According to the official version, Vyre was an intermediate sword expert, but he was actually level 5 and an advanced level graduate. Looking at his hand, the boy thought that if he added the troll's skills absorbed by Bab to his strength, he would be much stronger than the rank of graduate. While Vyre was contemplating his increased appetite for the demonic sword, his peace was suddenly disturbed by 3 boys coming up behind him. All 3 brothers, known as the Trident of the Baskerville family, looked at the boy anxiously and uncertainly, wanting to tell him something. Thinking that they had come to bother him again, the boy became wary and clearly showed that he was not happy to see the trio in front of him. Vyre immediately told the brothers that they had suffered enough in their past conflict, but he would not hold back. To this, the boys replied that they had come for another reason. The brothers said that they admired Vyre for being able to defeat Cerberus and the troll. Hearing such unexpected words from them, the boy spat out his chowder. Frightened by this reaction, the brothers asked if the boy was all right, but at this point, Vyre thought they were trying to fool him using ambush tactics. Not trusting the boy's words, Vyre sensed something wrong and began to think about how to teach the trio a lesson again. But at that moment, Superintendent Barrymore came silently up to the boy and addressed him, which distracted him from his bad thoughts. Immersed in himself, Vyre didn't notice the manager approaching him and was startled by the man's sudden appearance. Adjusting his glasses, Barrymore looked at the boy again and said insistently that the master was urgently summoning Vyre to his office. At the same time, a fancy horse-drawn carriage arrived at the Baskerville family estate and stopped at the main staircase of the building. On the flag flying above the carriage were 2 hands with red rubies in them, indicating that the guests were people of the Morgue family. Soon, Hugo received the guests in his office, but it was obvious that this meeting was not a joyful and long-awaited one for him, as he was very serious and unwavering. His guest was the deputy head of the Morgue family, Adolphe Morgue, who turned to Hugo and said that he had not changed a bit since they last saw each other. Adolphe expressed hope that the annual event would go off without incident, as last year there was 1 wounded person on each side of the family. Hugo replied coldly that perhaps the young men of the Morgue family were skillful fakers. As to them, an ordinary scratch was a serious wound. Not happy with the head of the Baskervilles' response, Adolphe cautiously replied that their clan was very noble and had a sense of dignity. It was obvious that at this moment, there was a strong tension between the Devil Morgue bloodline and the Iron Blood Sword Baskerville bloodline that hovered in the air. Initially, the relationship between the clans was not so bad, as the previous emperor claimed that magic and sword were 2 complementary components. Based on these words, the Baskerville clan and the Morgue clan organized a joint annual training session for young men from 8 to 15 years of age. However, there was a problem in the form of ruby mines on the border of the territories of the 2 clans, which caused discord between the heads and started a conflict and bloodshed. Looking at Hugo, Adolphe said that he had already heard about the new star in the Baskerville family, and considered this event to be a great happiness for the whole empire. Hugo responded by saying that he was honored by Adolphe's words, but he didn't think there was anything special about the event. Hearing this, Adolphe was indignant at Hugo's strange reaction, as he did not understand the reaction of this unfeeling man to his own son's praise. Adolphe invited Simu into the room and told Hugo that they also had a joyful event in their family because a genius of this kind had appeared in the Morgue family. At this moment, a female figure appeared in the open doors of the room, and a girl with long red hair stepped inside. When the girl sat down next to Adolphe, he introduced her, saying that she was his sister Lean's daughter, and her name was Simu. Then Adolphe told Simu to say hello to the head of the Baskerville family, but the girl did not do so and only stared intently at Hugo. Instead of a greeting, Hugo heard words to the effect that it was he who had stolen the ruby rubrics of the Morgue family, and was obliged to return all the stolen goods. It was obvious that the head of the Baskerville family did not expect to hear such words directed at him, and he was amazed by the girl's rudeness and directness. Outraged at such a loud accusation, Hugo La Baskerville's gaze filled with rage, and he glared angrily at his guests. Adolphe was horrified that Sima had said such words, embarrassing him, but the girl replied that her uncle had been the first to say it when they were in the carriage. Hugo was angrier than ever to hear Adolphe Morgue say such vile words about him behind his back. Wishing to smooth the conflict, Adolphe said that there was obviously a misunderstanding, to which Hugo replied that the girl was still stupid and he had no desire to explain that she had been badly brought up. However, Sima decided not to back down and again told him to return the rubies because they were so few that they were not even enough for her research. Adolphe was horrified by the assertiveness of the girl. At that moment, Hugo could not contain his anger and said to stop it at once because now he was sure that the Morgue family did not teach manners at all. However, Adolphe interrupted the head's speech and asked why he was so rude to the child, as the best swordsman of the empire cannot allow himself to threaten an 8-year-old girl. Hugo replied that it was worth teaching the girl not to be jealous of other people's property. At that moment, the previously invited Vire entered the office and interrupted their conversation. At the same moment, Barrymore entered the office after the boy and reported that the young gentleman had arrived. The latter confidently made his way to his father, Hugo. Looking carefully at the boy, Adolphe realized that this child was the new star of the Baskerville family, who, despite his age, had already become famous. Then, turning back to Simu, the man noticed that the girl was no longer next to him and realized he hadn't seen her disappear from his sight. Simu, lightning fast, got right up to Vire and scrutinized him, asking what he had just said. Looking thoughtfully at the girl, the boy realized that he remembered her name, and recognized that he had known this stroppy person in his past life. This young girl turned out to be the very same Iron Blood Empress of the Morgue bloodline, and even in such a prestigious bloodline, she was called a genius among geniuses. In her prime years, Simu had eliminated the demons and barbarians of Red Black Mountain, and was known for building a wall of blood and ash out of their bodies. The girl was also nicknamed the Incarnation of Power because she conquered social circles with her extraordinary beauty, and even subdued members of the imperial family. However, Vire realized that this was all from the future, and now he was facing an 8-year-old girl who was consistently telling him about her family's ownership of the ruby mines. After listening to Simu, Vire said that the girl had traveled such a long way for nothing, only to throw this senseless tantrum. Watching the children, Hugo and Adolphe Morgue were surprised by the boy's directness, as he was not at all shy about expressing himself freely in front of Simu. Resenting Vire's harsh words, the tension in the room escalated. The girl was very angry because she thought her words were not hysterical, finally losing control of herself. Camu awakened her magic, and said that she was going to explain to this stupid boy that the ruby mines were their property. However, Vire continued to remain completely calm and confident, looking at Camu with a smile. He realized that this was about to be a lot of fun. Using her magic, the girl created a copy of the lands of the Morgue and Baskerville clans, and said that she would explain her point of view to the inconsiderate boy. Looking at the icy sample, Vire looked at the girl in bewilderment as his expectations included a battle with Camu, not a lecture. However, Camu began her presentation by pointing her finger at a mine that is in the common safety zone of the two clans, where quality rubies are mined. The girl explained that the entrance to the mine is on the lands of the Morgue family, and the underground dwelling under the Baskerville estate. But since the structure of the estate does not give access to the mine, the spring belongs to the Morgue family. Camu was outraged that the Baskervilles insisted on interfering with the Morgue family's ruby mining and refused offers of rent for the estate. Finishing her story, Camu reminded him that rubies are used as a magical ingredient and the Baskervilles are not interested in such a thing. After listening to her, Vire replied that it must be a shame for the Morgue family that no one from the Baskerville family would open the doors of their estate for a penny. Camu said that the Baskervilles claimed not to be interested in the rubies, and Vire confirmed this by saying that their interest lies in territories beyond which they should not go. Annoyed, Camu said she would prove to the boy whose rubies were whose, and pointing with her hands on either side of the territories, she showed where each one's possessions were. Then, putting his hand on the borders of the territories of the two clans, the girl asked him who he thought the hand passing through her territory belonged to. Vire grinned and retorted that he knew who the hand lying on the lands of his territory belonged to. Suddenly, he grabbed the girl's hand and said that logically speaking, Camu's hand belonged to him because it was on his property. Not expecting such a prank from Vire, Camu was embarrassed and blushed for a moment because she didn't think he would dare to take her hand. But when she came to her senses, the girl started to resist and asked Vire why she had to belong to him, because the very thought of it was ridiculous. Looking at Camus, the boy replied that he did not say that it belonged to him, but the girl did not understand what he meant because earlier he had said those words himself. Suddenly, after his words, Vire lightning fast pulled out a sharp knife from his belt that was hidden behind his jacket. Adolphe Morgue and Superintendent Barrymore clearly did not expect this from the boy and were horrified, worried that he might harm Camus. Clenching the knife firmly in his hand, Vire gave her a threatening look and said that not Camus herself, but her hand was now his property. The girl couldn't believe Vire's words, and terror froze in her eyes as she felt her life threatened. Even the most callous and unfeeling man in the room was shocked by his son's act. For fear that he might do something stupid, the very next moment, Vire confidently and ruthlessly raised his knife and pointed it toward Camus to threaten her with the loss of her arm. The girl was very frightened by Vire's antics, and immediately screamed and cried, asking her uncle Adolphe to help her. Adolphe Morgue appeared lightning fast behind Vire's back and with a menacing glare ordered the boy to release that one's hand now and step away from his niece. Taking advantage of the moment that the boy was distracted by her uncle, Camus quickly pulled her hand from his shackles and shivered. The girl immediately threw herself into Uncle Adolphe's arms, complaining about Vire, who clearly wanted to deprive her of her hand. Adolphe shouted loudly, expressing his displeasure at the situation because the boy's behavior was unworthy, and this time Hugo agreed with him. Looking at his son, Hugo said that he should be aware of his limits of humor because this case goes beyond all limits. Tucking the knife into his finger, Vire calmly apologized for what had happened, but it was obvious that he didn't feel guilty. Without much effort, he bent the knife blade with his finger, and said that such jokes were quite usual and normal for him and his brothers. Until tears came down from Camus' eyes, Adolphe Morgue continued to be indignant, not understanding how children could have such silly jokes. Realizing that the conflict could not be avoided, Vire bowed and apologized to Adolphe once more, saying that he had no intention of taking Camus' hand away. At that moment, Hugo intervened, saying that it was inappropriate for adults to interfere in children's games, but Adolphe obviously didn't like what he said. Then Hugo said that he had some thoughts about the ruby mines that might appeal to the Morgue family, and suggested they discuss it sooner rather than later. At the same moment, a distraught Camus turned to Vire, and said that she would not let him get away with it, and would definitely strike back. But the boy listened to her words calmly and unafraid of Camus. He didn't say anything back and just smiled at her. Soon, the joint training between the Baskerville and Morgue clans began, where the competitors took their places in the arenas and the spectators settled around. There fought young men from 8 to 15 years old, but the fights of older children were more brutal, being real confrontations in contrast to the fights of younger participants. However, this year at the joint training, all eyes were directed in a completely different direction because there were participants who caught everyone's attention. Everyone looked at the young and brilliant representative of the Morgue family, the well-known Camus Morgue. The second who attracted a lot of attention was no less important representative of the Iron Bloodsword family, and son of the head of the family, Vire van Baskerville. At the suggestion of the Morgue family, a confrontation between two geniuses from both families took place in accordance with the rules of true combat. At last, the bell rang, announcing the beginning of the battle between the heirs, and those were ready to start attacking the enemy. Looking at Vire, Camus Morgue told him to prepare for battle and warned him that she would not spare him. Already in the next second, the girl released her magic, which formed a mysterious circle, and she cast some kind of spell. The spectators in the stands opened their mouths in amazement because not everyone had to meet with such powerful magic in their lives. Soon, Camus formed 4 circles of magic and 4 elements around herself, and thus created a powerful quadro spell. Looking at Hugo hotly, Adolphe said that his niece had simultaneously used 4 magic spells that were beyond the reach of even 15-year-old children. Without making Vire wait for long, the girl released all 4 elemental streams she had formed earlier towards him. The boy easily avoided every element directed in his direction, using his speed and agility to do so. In response to Camus' magic, the boy said that those attacks looked awesome, but he advised her to focus on one spell so as not to waste her powers. The girl decided not to heed Vire's advice, saying that he was stupid and didn't understand anything about magic. The moment Vire rushed to attack Camus directly, the girl built a wall of sand between them in a second using earth magic. However, the boy broke through that wall in a matter of seconds, saying that calling him stupid was too much. A little confused, Camus realized that it was the boasted power of the river Styx inherent in the Baskerville family, for Vire had easily destroyed this wall of sand. Realizing that Vire was almost on her, and she would not have time to repel the attack, Camus closed her eyes and realized her blunder in the fight. But without feeling the blow or the pain, the girl opened her eyes and saw Vire in front of her, who had his hand on her forehead and was ready to slap her. The next moment, the boy executed his attack, and before she could recover from the shock and realize what was going on, Camus flew backward from Veyer's powerful slap. Watching the battle, Adolphe Mord was shocked by what he saw, for he did not expect that the boy's decisive blow could be a slap. Sitting on the floor after the blow, Camus looked angrily at the boy and said that he underestimated her strength, and she would not forgive such a prank by him. Weyer smiled haughtily and said that her forehead was obviously very sore because there was a large bump on it. Camus was very angry because the boy had advised her to give up and accept his victory, or else the outcome could be much worse than the abrasion on her face. However, the girl decided not to admit defeat and instantly erected a double wall of sand between them to buy some time and prepare to attack once again. Seeing the walls in front of him, Weyer heard the girl laugh and say that now he wouldn't be able to break two walls. Determined to refute Camus' words, the boy rushed forward to break down this barrier, and hitting the wall hard, he said he was about to catch up with the girl again. Before she could regain her senses, the girl saw Weyer's hand in front of her, which had broken through the wall, and was once again reaching for her face. Looking at Camus, the boy suddenly asked who the hand in front of her face belonged to, and the girl once again didn't understand what he was talking about. Without waiting for a response from the girl, Weyer prepared to flick Camus again, and brought his hand up to her forehead. Having hit her in the forehead, the boy replied that this hand belonged to the one who was stronger than her, and the bump on her forehead became even bigger and redder. Thus, Camus fell for Weyer's ploy again and fell to the ground with a clatter from a powerful flick. The girl was once again in sharp pain from the boy's attack, and tears welled up in her eyes as she looked angrily towards Weyer, screaming with anger. The girl directed a stream of fire at Weyer, but he deftly dodged, thinking that from such pain she would give up. He realized that he was mistaken because Camus was too stubborn. As Camus dodged the attacks, the boy thought about how to calm the girl down because if he had his way, he would eliminate her in a second, but then there would be an uproar. Noticing the other fighting students behind him, Weyer decided to quickly deal with Camus without getting his hands dirty. Behind the boy's back, a battle was taking place between a stupid fire mage wasting magic and an equally stupid swordsman trying to dissect fire magic with his sword. Suddenly, Weyer's musings were interrupted by an exasperated Camus, who asked why he wasn't attacking. Angry that the boy was distracted from the fight, Camus swiftly headed towards him, ordering him not to run away and to fight her properly. It was at this moment that the fire mage behind them prepared to attack his opponent, and concentrated power in his hands to create a fireball. Finally, the moment came when the apprentice directed his attack against the swordsman, and Weyer realized that this was the right moment to execute his plan. Saying the girl's name, Weyer quickly jumped up to dodge that mage's fire attack and advised her to prepare the girl's protective magic. Not expecting such a turn of events, Camus froze in horror because she did not even suppose that her opponent would win in such a way. Seeing what was happening in the arena, Adolphe Morgue stood up abruptly from his seat and shouted, not expecting that his niece might actually get hurt in the battle. The explosion that occurred in the arena was so sudden that flames and smoke filled the entire space, and all the students became invisible. The disciples of the Morgue clan who watched the battle were horrified, for their Lady Camus had disappeared into the wall of smoke and flame. Then Adolphe Morgue's cry penetrated all corners of the training arena, for the man thought that his precious Camus had been hurt, and he could not keep her safe. However, the girl was unharmed and heard her uncle's voice but did not respond to him because she was able to stop the blow with protective magic. But after that, there was another problem. The merciless fire had burned almost all of the girl's clothes, and she could not appear in such an unsightly state in front of her uncle and the rest of the people present in the arena. Realizing that soon the smoke would clear and she would be found in such a state, Camus despaired because she thought she would be ridiculed by everyone. But in her moment of greatest vulnerability, a jacket was thrown on her, and surprised by this, the girl raised her eyes to look at the man who was her savior. To her surprise, her savior was Weyer, who gave her his jacket and told her to put it on quickly as the smoke had almost cleared. Surprised, Camus asked why he was helping her since he was now without clothes, to which the boy replied that if she didn't need the jacket, he could take it back. The girl was in confusion because she did not understand why her opponent helped her and saved her from disgrace while remaining in such a disadvantageous position. Then Camus noticed that Weyer's arm was wounded, and looking at that, Weyer thought that that stupid swordsman's sword had an aura left on it that pierced through his steel body. Soon, out of the cloud of smoke appeared the men of the Morgue family, who were diligently searching for their precious Miss Camus. They saw before them a lady sitting on the ground covered by another man's jacket, and beside her stood Mr. Weyer with a bare torso. Soon the smoke cleared, and seeing his niece, Adolphe Morgue was glad that she was not hurt, while Hugo looked on silently and intently. The people of the Baskerville family were puzzled, for the one on the ground was Miss Camus, but the young Vire was bleeding, so it was not clear who had won the battle. Then they noticed that Vire was quite strong, thanks to the waters of the river Styx, and looking at his muscles, it was immediately clear that the boy often practiced. While those present were discussing the fact that this 8-year-old boy had amazing abilities, Camus, who was in the arms of her uncle, was looking at him with bewilderment. After the practice fight, Mr. Hugo and his son were on their way to the study, and the man asked the boy if he had enjoyed the fight with Camus. Vire replied that he was able to feel the significance of the event again, to which the head said that fights between wizards and between swordsmen are very different. Then Hugo asked the boy why he attacked at half strength, and Vire replied that he had hesitated because he had never fought a girl before. Paying attention to his son's wounded arm, the head of the clan said that carelessness in battle leads to injuries, so this will be a lesson for the boy. When Vire heard Hugo's words, he was surprised because he couldn't believe that his insensitive and cruel father could care about him. From his past life, the boy remembered only Hugo's coldness and cruelty, and many said that the head had become like this after the tragic loss of his first wife and eldest daughter. Deciding that the reason for this did not concern him, and he would not forgive his father anyway, Vire heard a sudden question about the ruby springs for which a fierce battle had been fought. The boy replied that they should give them up, to which the head was very surprised and asked why they should give the ruby mines to the Morg family. Vire replied that the main goal of the clan is to expand their territories, and that the Redfang Mine Mountain is home to creatures that are their big problem. By using the Morg clan in the right way, the Baskerville clan can minimize the sacrifices needed to develop new lands. Hearing this, the head was pleased with this answer. On this basis, having obtained the rights to own the mines, the Morgs will send many workers there who will lure demons and barbarians to themselves, and thus all problems will be solved. Hugo realized that the rubies would turn even redder, stained with Morg blood, and then the head of the Morg family would regret entering Baskerville territory. Such a strategy was perfectly in line with the head's plan, but Vire knew that that was the plan from the beginning, and he had to direct all the demons to the Morgs. As they continued down the corridor, Vire added that it was still necessary to keep an eye on the Morg's activities, to which Hugo replied that he had been gathering hounds to guide them to the mines for some time now. Suddenly, Adolphe Morg appeared in the corridor in front of Hugo and Vire, and they were surprised because they had not seen him appear. Behind Adolphe's back was a hidden Camus, who was looking intently and with interest in the direction of the young Vire. Looking at the head of the Baskerville family, the man turned to Hugo and asked for another conversation before they left the manor. Once in the office, Hugo asked what other questions the Morg family had, and Adolphe said there was one important topic left to discuss. The man said that rent was only one of the peaceful options for resolving the mine problem, and Hugo asked what else the man could offer him. Looking at the head of the Baskerville, Adolphe said that another possible option for a peaceful resolution to this issue could be a marriage contract between the families. The deputy head of the Morg family proposed a contract between a man and a woman from their families, and Hugo asked who he saw as candidates for marriage. Unexpectedly for Camus, the man said that he wanted to bring together his niece and the eldest son of the Baskerville family, specifying that the girl is a beauty and has no flaws. Adolphe thought that the eldest son of the Baskervilles, named Little Sunshine, would make a perfect match for his niece, but her eyes were fixed on another. After listening to Adolphe, Hugo replied that his eldest son would be 25 years old this year, and he considered it too great a difference in the age of the candidates. Camus was obviously not happy to hear this, but apparently Adolphe didn't care and said that the age difference was only 17 years and could be overlooked. Suddenly, notwithstanding the fact that her uncle was not interested in her opinion, Camus expressed that she would not marry a man who was weaker than her mother. Adolphe replied that the girl might not marry at all if she looked for a suitor stronger than her mother, but the girl said she saw that possibility. Camus did not want to have a chosen one with whom there would be a big difference in age, to which Hugo replied that she was not in the store to go through the options. The girl said that she was aware of the situation she was in, but she was also not going to give her consent to the first offer that she didn't like. After saying those words, Camus immediately turned around and directed her gaze towards the young Vire. Hugo did not immediately understand why the girl was looking at his son, but Uncle Adolphe, looking at his niece, immediately suspected what she was driving at. Looking at the Morgs, in response, Vire didn't immediately understand what she meant either. After revealing his niece's thoughts, Adolphe whispered in Camus' ear that Vire was not a first-rate heir with the surname Van, so he should not be chosen to be her husband. Hearing Adolphe's whispers, Hugo was immediately angry, thinking that this was out of line and that he was humiliating his son because of his lineage right in front of their eyes. Asking the boy's opinion of the situation, Hugo firmly stated that unlike the Morgs, marriage was not the most important thing in Vire's life. Pondering his father's question, Vire looked at Camus carefully and thoughtfully, pondering what answer to give to the Morg family. Finally, the boy finished his musings and stopped keeping everyone waiting by answering that he agreed to marry Camus Morgue. The expression on Camus's face clearly indicated that she had not expected Vire to agree to this, and Adolphe Morgue could not hide his surprise. Surprised upon hearing Vic's decision, the man became visibly nervous and angry, for he had expected the boy's rejection and was unwilling to give Camus in marriage to a second-rate heir. Camus thought that Vire didn't hate her after all and was a shyer person than she might have thought. Then Hugo said that the purity of blood did not matter in their family because even from the first grade, children with the surname Lee could turn out to be fools. But Adolphe still doubted, pondering the words of the head. Adolphe approached the boy and looked at him very carefully with an evaluating and hard look, as if to assess him as a commodity. Vire also looked at Adolphe Morgue carefully and stubbornly, not at all ashamed to look such an important man straight in the eye. Adolphe Morgue was known as the Sixth Circle Master and the strongest mage of the Morgue family, and he was also nicknamed the Evil Nephew. Foolishly appreciating the boy, Adolphe said that he should not say such things but scornfully informed Vire that he was too simple to be a husband for his niece. Vire thought that this man was not liked even by the warlord of the Baskerville family, but wanted to get a first-rate son of the family to marry his niece. Putting his hand on the young man's shoulder, Adolphe immediately realized that he had a strong body like a child and then asked why he was silent, because he had heard what he had been told. Looking intently at the man, Vire replied that the man himself had said he shouldn't say such words to him, so he didn't listen to him. Camus was amazed that Vire could say such barbed words to Uncle Adolphus, but Hugo was obviously amused by his son's response and audacity. Hearing the boy's impertinent answer, Adolphe laughed indignantly and asked the head of the Baskerville family for permission to speak privately with the young man. Hugo said that he didn't expect that being the best magician of the empire, he would dare to threaten a child of 8 years old, to which Adolphe replied that he was obliged to talk to the candidate for groom. The man said he was making this request not as a messenger of the Morgue family but as uncle. Camus objected and asked her uncle not to do so, holding back her anger. Adolphe laughed and ordered his niece to sit quietly, for he felt he should have spoken to this young man alone from the beginning. Then turning again to Hugo, the man asked what he thought about it, and the head replied that if it was so necessary, he would give his consent. After the conversation, all 4 of them were back in the training arena because Adolphe decided to personally put the young man in his place and check what he was capable of. Hugo and Camus stood outside the arena, anxiously awaiting the start of the battle between such a strong man and a boy whose forces were unequal. Looking at the boy, Adolphe Morgue turned to him, saying that he would evaluate the young man's outstanding skills, so he should show everything he is capable of. Replying in agreement, the boy thought that if the man really saw all the skills and what he was capable of, he would definitely faint. Unleashing his magic, Adolphe suggested a handicap as an advantage given to a weaker contestant to equalize his chances of success. Adolphe Morgue then used his magic to create a clay jug and filled it with crystal-clear water. Seeing this, Camus was amazed at how skillful her uncle was because he skillfully and harmoniously combined the magic of fire, earth, and water. Putting a jug of water on his head, the man said that he would fight holding it in this way, and if even a drop spilled, the young man would win. After hearing the terms of the fight, Vire thought that Adolphe was very strong. Even in his previous life, he was hard to compete with, so this fight would help him learn more about him. Looking back at his father, Vire assumed that this was the reason he had given him permission to fight because he wanted to see what Adolphe was capable of. Looking at who said to attack, the young man wondered what his chances of winning would have been if he had fought in his prime in his past life. Deciding not to fight at full strength but only to meet Hugo's expectations, Vire rushed to attack to finally test Adolphe Morgue's magic skills. At that moment, Camus was horrified and screamed, saying that he couldn't run straight at Uncle Adolphe because it was very dangerous. In the next moment, the man had built a strong protective barrier in front of him, and Vire's straightforward attack was unsuccessful as he failed to penetrate the shield. Looking at the young man, Adolphe said that when fighting a swordsman, the best attack is to use a shield because that's how you can hold back the enemy's attacks. Angry and focused on his opponent, Vire realized that it would be difficult to break this strong shield with a normal or a sword. Suddenly, Adolphe concentrated his magical power and looked arrogantly at the boy, saying that now it was his turn to go on the attack. In the next second, streams of Adolphe's magical fire were directed towards Vire, and he prepared to dodge the attack. At this point, Camus got angry and complained about her uncle's attack, who didn't even use this magic even in battle with her, to which Adolphe asked whose side she was on. As Hugo watched the battle, he noticed that there was no need to stop his son, as he moved with such speed that he could easily dodge the attack. The head wondered how his young hunting dog would act in a fight with a mage, but the boy, meanwhile, pondered whether Adolphe Morgue had all that power. Vire realized that if he combined the experience from his past life and his stronger body and skills from above, he might be able to eliminate Adolf. Concentrating the necessary amount of strength, Vire once again rushed to attack the man, trying to break the man's magical shield with his sword. Watching the young man's futile and pathetic attempts, Adolf said that he couldn't break his shield even if he hit it 100 times. However, Vire didn't listen to the man's words and persisted time after time with the same insistence, delivering powerful blows to the shield. As he continued to hold the shield, Adolf noticed that the young man was aiming at only one spot, and his movements were as precise as a machine, as well as his admirable concentration and sword skills. But after a little while, Vire's sword couldn't withstand the pressure and suddenly broke, bouncing off the shield and shattering into small pieces. After the incident, Adolf smiled haughtily and said that it was to be expected and the boy should have considered the strength of the sword and the strength of the shield beforehand. At that moment, Hugo and Camus, who were watching the fight, were shocked by what they saw, for they had not expected the boy to lose his weapon. Happy about this development of the fight, Adolf said that Vire was not that good and he was not worthy to become Camus' husband, but he didn't notice a drop of water running down his face. Already with the next second, water began to run down the face of the man who didn't even realize that the boy had managed to stab the blade of his sword into his jug. Adolf couldn't believe what had happened because the boy was obviously weaker than him, to which Vire immediately wished the man would enjoy the chill from the water and cool down a bit. Looking at the man, the boy smiled contentedly and clarified that he had said water from the pot. After realizing that Vire's victory may well have been accidental, Camus was embarrassed because she realized that he had proved himself worthy of marrying her, so in the future their marriage would take place. Looking at his son, Hugo smiled proudly and thought that the sword blade was in the pot not by pure chance but because Vire had calculated everything. After his son's victory, Hugo began to realize that apparently, Vire van Baskerville was growing up to be a more cunning and intelligent hunting dog than he had previously imagined. 7 years have passed since the battle between Adolphus Morg and Vire, but the action takes place again on the same Baskerville training ground. A huge and vicious monster appeared in front of the young hunting dogs of the Baskerville family, and roared loudly. Looking at their opponent without a drop of fear, the matured young men held their swords tightly in their hands and were in full combat readiness. Finally, the monster decided to act and rushed towards the boys at full speed, wanting to tear them to shreds. The young men decided not to yield to their opponent and grouped together to attack the monster, meaning to defeat it as a team. One of the students crept up to the monster's head and struck a strong blow on one of the horns to distract its attention. Using this opportunity, in the next moment, the students all rushed towards the dangerous monster to deal more damage to it. The fight was closely watched by Stepford Shire, instructor of Baskerville, and turning to the young men, he advised them to avoid fighting a stronger opponent. The man also said that one should not be greedy and aim at vital organs from the beginning because it would be effective to hit the hind legs to slow down the monster. Suddenly, from behind the backs of the students, someone rushed towards the monster with lightning speed that they did not even have time to notice who bypassed them because they were completely invisible. These hunting dogs turned out to be the well-known trident of the Baskerville family, and those without a drop of fear began to mercilessly strike the terrible monster. It was obvious that the boys had matured and their strength and skills had increased many times over, thanks to which they were able to deal with the monster in a matter of minutes. Looking at the exhausted monster, Stepford Shire praised the brothers for their progress, and made sure that this trio was strong enough and their Baskerville aura had finally matured. After catching its breath and regaining its strength, the evil monster once again rushed to attack the students, wanting revenge and devouring them all without a trace. Eager to win, the young hound dogs also rushed to meet the ghastly creature in order to finish the fight and eliminate it as soon as possible. Soon there was loud applause from the Stepford Shire instructor in honor of the victory of the heirs of the Baskerville family. The man congratulated the young men on the successful completion of their 7 years of training and mastery of the first level, for they were now entry-level sword experts. The instructor also said that the level of this caged bearcat is much lower than the level of a wild individual living on Red Black Mountain. Even the strongest elders can't cope with the savage monster, and compared to the actual battle experience, the experience of today's battles is simply negligible. After congratulating the young men on their graduation, the man said that they should win by natural talent, or with the help of experience gained, but the main goal was to stay alive. After the battle was over, the boys sat and talked about enlisting in different orders, discussing who chose which order for themselves. One youth said he chose 3 orders, Doberman, Pitbull, and Rottweiler, to which another youth said he liked the Wolfhound order the best. In the family of Baskerville, there are 7 knightly orders that were created for various purposes, namely vigilant search, guarding, suppression, elimination, and many others. Continuing the discussion about orders, one of the boys asked which order a guy sitting apart from everyone else could choose. This estranged young man was Vire van Baskerville, who was riding the breathless body of the huge and ghastly beowulf. The students discussed that Vire had single-handedly defeated a stronger beowulf than they had, and most likely one with the third level their instructors possessed. Not paying attention to these conversations, the young man reasoned that his progress took longer because in 7 years he had only managed to move from elementary to intermediate level. Vire was dissatisfied with his progress, but his musings about slow and unproductive development were interrupted by the suddenly approaching manager, Barrymore, who called out to him. Vire turned around to greet the man and heard a message from him that the head of the clan was looking for him and was waiting for him in his office. Smiling warmly and affably at the young Vire, the manager told him the secret that the master seemed to have finally realized the position for the young man. Soon, the young man arrived at Hugo's office and greeted him, saying that they had not seen each other for a long time and asked how the head of the family was doing. Without answering, the visibly aged Hugo stared sternly at his grown-up son, who immediately noticed a new scar on the bridge of his father's nose. Vire also looked at the man, puzzled, and stared at him, not understanding why he was silent. He asked where his father got the scar on his face. Running his fingers along the bridge of his nose, Hugo replied that he had been shot by a barbarian archer when the Baskerville fought those on Red Black Mountain. The young man asked if she had been caught, but the head replied that she could not be caught, but he remembered well the foxy face of this dangerous woman. Hugo then congratulated Vire on his graduation and told him that now his life would become even more difficult, and then the young man made sure that he would soon find out about his new position. In a past life, at this point, Vire became a trainee of the Pitbull Order and, like an unwanted dog, was sent to Red Black Mountain to engage in brutal battles. At the age of 15, the young men of the Baskerville family are divided into elite and disposable, where the former study politics and government. The disposable, meanwhile, take their own lives or help the elite in order for the elite to catch up with the disposable by the level of swordsmanship honed by those in battles. A fifth level was specially created, which was never reached by Vire. Looking at his father, the young man was sure that Hugo would never allow his illegitimate second-rate son to take an elite course, and would send him to fight his enemies again. However, the head of the family told his son that he was appointing him to the position of a member of the lower house, which greatly surprised Vire, who obviously did not expect to hear such words. Hugo explained that members of the lower house help to administer legislation to the court system and do outreach to local businesses. Being the illegitimate son of Vire, he couldn't believe that he had been selected for the elite course and would now be able to take charge of the Baskerville family's various affairs. Then Hugo said that the young man's achievements were at least 10 years ahead of the other students, so he was awarded the position of Deputy Sill of the city of Underdog. Looking at his son, the head asked if he agreed with the position, and the boy replied that he would follow his father's decree. But before that, he had some things to discuss. Vire said he wanted to talk about the ruby mines formerly owned by the Morg family, and the head immediately knew what it was about. The head replied that he remembered the promise of his son's reward and asked if that was what Vire was talking about, and he immediately replied that that was what he meant. Then the young man asked Hugo for a favor, which surprised Barrymore, who was standing next to him because his request was not modest. Determinedly looking the head of the clan straight in the eyes, Vire said that he would take a waiver from that if it was really hard for the father to do so. Outraged at his son's insolence, Hugo loudly and carelessly stamped the documents that lay before him and said firmly that he was refusing his son's request. But looking at the young man without a drop of anger or rage, the man said he believed Vire wouldn't do anything stupid. Vire said not to worry about it, thinking that he couldn't get used to Hugo calling him son and listening to his requests. Shortly after the conversation ended, Vire and Barrymore left Hugo's office and headed down the hallway toward the exit. At that moment, the manager turned to the boy, telling him that Master Hugo treasured his son very much, though it might seem otherwise. Barrymore said that apparently the head has big and grandiose plans for the boy because he was not sent directly to the battlefield, and even allocated a position of power. Not wanting to believe in his father's good intentions, Vire coldly replied that it could be discussed when he had excelled in his duties as subconsul. Despite this position, the young man realized that this job was not interesting but gave him the opportunity to safely develop his skills because he wanted to avenge the past. Leaving Barrymore alone, Vire headed away, determined to make Hugo Law Baskerville experience the same pain he had experienced in the past. Soon, the young vicer's appointment to his new position was confirmed, and he arrived at the Baskerville training ground in the town of Underdog. Knowing that an important man was on his way to the city, the supervisor turned to the workers and ordered them to clean the whole area to a shine because tomorrow the new subconsul should arrive. Looking at the boys, the man told them to pay special attention to the fact that this man was from the noble family of Baskerville, and they immediately took note of this information. When the man left them, one of the guys said he was interested in what the new subconsul would be like, and the other guy replied that he was rumored to be only 15 years old. Having come to the conclusion that they were doomed again because there was no telling what to expect from such a young subconsul, the guys noticed an unknown young man on the territory. Not understanding where the young man came from, the guy put his hand on his shoulder and addressed him, saying that outsiders should not enter this area. Turning to the employee, Vire glared menacingly at him and ordered him to remove his hand from his shoulder. Now, the young man took out the order of his appointment as subconsul and presented it to the employees, and they were shocked to realize who was standing right in front of them. Visibly nervous, the workers said they had not expected the subconsul to arrive so early, to which Vire immediately ordered them to prepare drinks and invite guests. Leaving the young man and heading into the building, the young man said it was time to throw a grand party to celebrate his arrival in town. The workers were bewildered, for they were very surprised at the first order of the new subconsul and were amazed at his folly. Soon, however, the order was obeyed, and all the tables were occupied with aromatic drinks and various delicious treats. The entire courtyard was filled with important, honored, and wealthy guests who were making small talk and enjoying the feast. At the same time, the underdog town clerk, Chihuahua Baskerville, was extremely puzzled by what was happening while he was watching through his office window. Looking out the window, the man thought that a flighty and daring young man had arrived at their post and had immediately thrown an alcoholic party here on the first day. Remembering that all of his predecessors had been fired for bribes, Chihuahua considered this party thrown in a sacred workplace an inappropriate event. The secretary shouted, calling Vire a petty fool and saying that at this rate he could destroy the place. It was at this point that Vire crept up to the man from behind and asked if the man was the local secretary, which startled Chihuahua, and he froze in place, not realizing when the young man had time to enter. The secretary immediately turned to the young man, realizing he had heard everything, but Vire simply introduced himself, and the man gave his name in response. The boy inquired about the name of the secretary, asking if he had a second name because that could mean that the man was from another family. In other words, that Chihuahua was not a blood relative but a common laborer who faced discrimination in the lineage and put up with it. Realizing this, Vire put his hand on Chihuahua's shoulder and said that the situation was working out just fine. Leaving the man perplexed, Chihuahua replied that he had been born here and was therefore familiar with the situation. It was labeled as local people being hardworking, so he was not going to make changes to the existing structure by lending his support. Hearing the words of the boy, Chihuahua did not believe in the good intentions of the one who was still dissatisfied with the banquet and thought that this was a new way of intimidation. Looking at the focused young man who was familiarizing himself with the documents of the city of Underdog, the man could not understand why he had come here with the party. After reviewing the records, Fakir said that there are many flaws in the judicial system, which surprised the secretary because he, at his young age, understood such issues. Young said the problem with this city has been the growth of illegal businesses, which in turn leads to the black market's supremacy over the law. Looking at the secretary, the young man said that this problem would not be solved only by shutting down illegal enterprises and that it was necessary to eliminate the main persons of the black market. Vire said he knows what the subcouncil's responsibilities are and he respects the existing legislation but will still introduce new legislation. Shua asked what this was about. The young man said he would eradicate the black market in a week, but for the law to take effect, he needed a reason for it. The secretary asked why he needed a reason for it. Vire said that he is young and also a newcomer who will only start his duties tomorrow, so he needs an introduction to make it more convincing. Then, looking out the window at the wealthy guests, the boy said an interesting phrase about spreading dung everywhere to catch dung flies. Looking at the young man carefully, Secretary Chihuahua could not understand what the new subcouncil was thinking about, and what he would have to endure during his reign. Soon the next day came, and a huge number of people gathered in the main street of Dortsmile in the town of Underdog. The new subcouncil, in the person of Vire van Baskerville, was introduced to the people and took up his duties as of today. Secretary Chihuahua's subjects asked why the subcouncil had been standing there since dawn. The man stood silent, not knowing what to say. Looking at the citizens of Underdog, Vire turned to them and greeted them, saying that he was the new subcouncil of the city. Looking at Vire, all the residents discussed that he was a young and cute boy who was probably not capable of solving the city's problems. Then the young man said that despite the change of subcouncil, the existing rules within the Baskerville family remain as strict and everything remains the same. The residents laughed, saying that the people sitting at the top were doing it themselves and soon the new subcouncil himself would be in the lobby of influential officials. At that moment, the secretary shouted, saying that those disrespecting such an important man of the Baskerville family might lose their heads. Looking at the young man, the residents kept saying that he would not be able to enforce the law and it would be better if Secretary Chihuahua became the sub-council. After hearing the complaints of the townspeople, Vire immediately took out a long stick and raised it in public to draw attention to it. Looking at it with bewilderment, the inhabitants held their breath because they did not understand where the incomprehensible actions of the new sub-council were leading to. In the next moment, the young man had already heaved this stick into the ground with lightning speed and agility, causing everyone to be shocked. All the inhabitants were very much surprised at the unexpected act of the new sub-council and amazed at such speed and power. Watching what happened, Secretary Chihuahua and his charges also did not escape this fate of surprise and opened their mouths at what they saw. Releasing the stick left in the ground, Vire said that in accordance with his powers as sub-council, he would promulgate a new special law. With a serious look at everyone, Vire said that the first clause of the law states a reward of 100 million gold to whoever can pull the stick out of the ground. Hearing Vire's words, Secretary Chihuahua and his charges could not believe their ears, for they did not understand what he was up to. The people of the city were also shocked by the first paragraph of the law announced by the sub-council and did not understand what the young man wanted to achieve in this way. Residents began to discuss animatedly that such a huge amount of money is the salary of a simple man for 4 years and most likely it is some kind of fraud. With a cold and serious look at the people of Underdog, Vire asked them if they didn't want to get 100 million just by pulling a stick out of the ground. Realizing that none of the people agreed to get the stick and feared him, the young man decided to make adjustments to the new law to get those interested. Now the sub-council announced that he would pay 1 billion gold coins to whoever pulled out the stick and asked which of the inhabitants would be willing to try their hand at it. This time, people became indignant, thinking that it was a silly prank and absurd because it can't be that the nobility was giving away such big money to ordinary people. Looking at the young sub-council with distrust, the residents told him to stop this circus because $1 billion is a huge sum not available to mere mortals. Listening to the complaints and grievances of the residents, Secretary Chihuahua bowed his head in shame and embarrassment at the young sub-council's behavior. Realizing that once again people would not agree to such terms, Vire decided to make one more amendment to his new law. Not about to give up, the young man said he would give 10 billion gold coins to the person who could pull the stick out of the ground. Not understanding what was going on and what the young sub-council was doing, the people were once again shocked by the young man's insistence. However, after the third insistence, people hesitated and were already beginning to consider trying to get that stick. But seeing the sword behind the sub-council's back, the people hesitated again because they thought that in case of failure, this small rich man could arrange an execution for them. Nevertheless, the villagers continued to discuss how deep the stick might be in the ground and how to pull it out, suspecting that the sub-council was obviously up to something bad. Vire again appealed to the residents, asking if there were any takers for such a sum, intending to raise it again, but Secretary Chihuahua said there was not much money in the treasury. Suddenly, for everyone, the voice of a little blonde girl with a basket of flowers came out of the crowd and agreed to try to get that stick out of the ground. One of the inhabitants started to stop the girl, Judy, saying that she might lose her head, to which she replied that her mother was sick and it was worth trying to get money for her. Laughing, the girl Judy asked an acquaintance to take care of her sick mom if she was doomed to such an outcome. As she approached the sub-council, the girl thought that if things didn't work out, it would be nice to get a few coins for being the laughing stock of the town. Looking sternly and coldly at the girl, Judy, the young sub-council Vire ordered her to pull out the stick since she had already volunteered to try it. Gathering her courage, Judy crouched down and gripped the stick tightly with both hands. With all her strength, the girl was suddenly able to pull the stick out of the ground. The residents were shocked that the small and weak Judy managed to do this and in fact, the stick was not stuck too deep into the ground. Surprised that the stick came out of the ground so easily, the girl looked fearfully at sub-council Vire, expecting to be punished for what she had done. With a sinister and unapproachable look, the young sub-council pulled back his cloak and pointed his hand toward the sword behind his back. Thinking that her life was about to end because of her greed and disrespect for the nobility, Judy closed her eyes and begged her mother's forgiveness for leaving her. But her suspicions turned out to be false, and suddenly Vire took out a bag of gold and brought it to the girl, telling Judy to take the 100 million he was giving her. At first, she could not believe that she had not been punished and had been rewarded by the young sub-council who had kept his promise. Asking Judy where she lived, Vire said he would provide her with a guard to help her keep and deliver the 10 billion safely to her home so that no one would rob her on the way. Then, stroking the little girl's head and praising her for her courage and bravery, the young sub-council said that these were the new laws and he pledged to keep his word to the people of Underdog. Because of this introduction, the Vire's law became more popular with the constitution. For now, breaking the law was punishable and compliance was rewarded. This simple logic touched the hearts of all citizens, and all citizens were now sure that the new sub-council kept his word and was different from all other corrupt and insolent rulers. After the introduction of Veyer's special law, illegal activity decreased markedly and the crime rate in the city was cut in half. Meanwhile, a plaque was hung on the wall in the sub-council's office, and the inscription on it said that the promise must be kept without deceit. After looking at the plaque, Weyer told the secretary that he had beautiful handwriting. After finishing his work, Chihuahua exhaled heavily and wiped the sweat from his forehead. Then, looking at the young man, the man said that he did not expect to see such an unconventional performance because for all 20 years of his service, this had never happened. Weyer replied that it was done to attract the attention of the people and to make a strong impression on them, for one cannot anger the inhabitants for distrust and ignorance of the laws. Letting out a tear, Secretary Chihuahua said that all his hard work prior to Weyer's arrival had not been in vain, and he was ready to serve the young sub-council for the rest of his days. The young man thought that he had picked up this method from Camus Morgue from the distant future when she took over as head of the family, reducing the level of offending to almost zero. Shrugging off the memories and unfolding the map, Weyer said that it was now urgent to make up for the loss of the prize money they had given to the winning girl. Marking some areas with a cross, the young man said that these places hide illegal organizations, with the help of which they will return money from the black market. Looking at the map, Secretary Chihuahua was very surprised and asked Weyer how he knew that the organizations were in the specified locations. Remembering that in his past life he had patrolled in that area all the time, the boy pointed to his nose and replied that he had smelled them. Looking at the boy with astonishment, Chihuahua thought that he was an amazing and unusual person and wondered how far he could sniff out. At that moment, one of the estate workers burst into the office and said that the sub-council had received a request for an interview from the Youth Self-Governance Committee from the mayor's office. The secretary was not happy about the news, but Weyer wanted to see what kind of pathetic local aristocrats would conduct this interview with him. The secretary replied that the self-proclaimed committee was, in fact, a sect and had been established by the second and third generations of 7 families of the Baskerville family. The boy realized that the committee wanted to comment on his new special law because it was obvious that they didn't like it. Looking at the secretary and the worker, the young sub-council said that the nasty dung flies had finally smelled the dung and surprised them, exuding an ominous aura. Weyer said that it was time to begin eradicating the lowly pests that were destroying this city. In the city of Underdog, there was a prominent club called Burning Suspense, located in a luxurious and expensive hotel. The VIP room, located at the very back of this club, was the venue for parties costing 10 million gold coins for 6 hours. There were 7 core committee members who had no shame in wasting a lot of money on building tall towers of liquor glasses just for fun and entertainment. These men were the second and third generations of 7 families from the Baskerville family, and these young rich men spent millions of gold for a single bottle of champagne and denied themselves nothing. After pouring the drink on the table, the head guy from the committee ordered his minions to lick up the spill, and they crouched down in front of him and thanked him, saying they could get drunk on it. Sitting down on the sofa, the head of the committee said that his financial outlay did not matter, for the money did not run out, to which his friend replied that it was thanks to the Baskerville. Then he said that the slave trade was thriving and the kidnapping of barbarians was going well, and it was all due to the Baskervilles' fixation on expanding their borders. The young men were glad that they remained unnoticed by the imperial family and were under the protection of the very Baskerville that provided security. The head of the committee said that this was because the Baskerville family was made up of idiots who could wield a sword and that the Meza-Madaro family was proof of that. Meza-Madaro was the most loyal of all the families but was completely destroyed by the hands of the Baskerville, who were unaware of the setup by the committee. This loyal Baskerville family did not like the entertainment of the committee, so they were framed and ruthlessly exterminated, leaving only 7 families in the lineage. Then the guys started talking about the new sub-council, saying they'd heard about his illegitimate second-class background and that they'd sent him an application for an interview. The head of the committee said that the sub-council's name was Weyer, and he was only 15 years old, so he also threw an alcoholic party on the first day he joined the mayor's office, saying that the sub-council was obviously a fool. The head of the committee offered to play with the young man by inviting him to a big party, then they would make Weyer, who had no money and who couldn't go to his family because of fear, pay for the drinks, and at the end, they would say that it was a joke. The head of the committee thought that after such pressure and fright, the boy would not even dare to look in the direction of the committee, let alone make a complaint. Suddenly, the doors of the room opened and a butler entered the room, announcing that beautiful girls had arrived to treat the guys. At the same moment, another man entered the room, and one of the committee members looked in surprise at the stranger who had come in. The boy asked if anyone knew who had invited the young waiter, to which the butler replied that he thought he had been invited by someone on the committee. Grabbing the young man by the hair, the butler said that he had walked in here so calmly that he hadn't even aroused any suspicion, and then asked who the young man was. Vire clearly didn't like this attitude from the butler, and his eyes filled with anger and rage. Then something happened that suddenly shocked all the members of the committee, and the invited girls sitting next to them. Before the butler had time to remember and realize how it happened, he saw his mangled hand by this young man in a matter of seconds. Supporting his arm, the man cried out in great pain, and the committee members meanwhile looked at the unfamiliar young man in horror and asked what he was doing. With a disdainful look at the committee members, the young man introduced himself by saying his name was Vire van Baskerville. Frightened by his sudden appearance, the participants asked why the sub-council had visited them, to which Vire replied that they had invited him themselves. Nervously laughing, the head of the committee said that he had not expected such a short visit from the young man, so he could not prepare for his arrival. Then the guy whispered to his friend, saying it was time to tame the newcomer by first sitting him down at the table, and then making him pay for all the expense of alcohol. Hearing their vile conversation, Vire banged his hand with all his might on the table and told the boys to stop whispering in front of him. Everyone present was surprised and frozen in place, not expecting such an act from the young man. In the next second, the huge tower of glasses with expensive alcohol shook and began to collapse. The spray from the drinks flew on all the committee members and the girls sitting next to them like rain. The head of the committee couldn't believe that the young sub-council had blasted the champagne tower with a mana resonance with only one minor blow to the table. Glancing at the embittered sub-council standing across from him, the guy suggested that Vire might have immense power and be an alumnus. The guys began to argue among themselves about who was the strongest, and who should go against the sub-council because he was very strong. At this point, Vire walked up to one of the contestants and, putting his hand on the guy's shoulder, really scared him. A rather nervous committee member said they would pay for all the booze that had been spilled by the sub-council earlier. Vire replied that of course they would pay for the drinks themselves because they were unlikely to extort money from him. But the guy replied that they had just misspoken and he had misunderstood them. All the members of the committee began to say that they would not have done such a ruthless thing to a man of the Baskerville family, and had simply decided to test the young man's mettle as a sub-council. The head said that in this way they checked the young man for temptations, for now the city had fallen into sins, and the other fellow said that they would follow Vire. However, after listening to the guy's words, Vire suddenly hit one of the guys, telling them one important truth. He held ruthlessly, holding the lad by his flesh. The young sub-council said that a master could test his dog all he wanted, but not the other way around. The boy immediately howled in sharp pain, and the young sub-council told him not to think he could fear nothing with only money in his pocket and a little power. Tossing the guy to the floor, Vire said that he had obviously never faced real fear. Putting his foot on the guy's face and looking back at the others, the young man asked if they understood why he had done this to their friend. Without hearing a reply, Vire said that the same thing would happen to the others. Being very frightened, the other guys started to say that they knew what was wrong. Realizing that the boys still didn't understand the true reason for his actions, the young sub-council ordered him to behave and crushed their friend's head with his foot. Seeing the sub-council eliminate their friend, all the guys stood up abruptly from their seats and shouted, calling him a fool and claiming that he couldn't get away with it. Sneaking up on one of the guys, the young man smiled evilly and said that they obviously never made the right conclusions from their nefarious deeds. The sub-council said that he realized that all this time the boys had been fearlessly engaged in kidnapping, illegal slave trade, and insulting Baskerville. After eliminating this guy as well, Vire said that there was obviously no way to tame these animals in the room without flogging them. A little later, the young sub-council found himself in a creepy dungeon where there were cells for the criminals of this city. Standing behind Vire's back, Secretary Chihuahua was very surprised at the sight before him, for he had never been here before. At that moment, a man shouted from the cell and said that Vire would not get away with it, and would be punished by his father. Man turned out to be the head of the committee who threatened the young sub-consul with violent reprisals as soon as he approached him. Seeing the ghastly condition of the boys, the secretary asked Vire why he had beaten and maimed the committee members so badly. The young man asked if he was overdoing it, to which Chihuahua replied that the boy was definitely overdoing it because you can't turn people into chops. After listening to the man, Vire told him not to worry about it because he hadn't even started yet, and the secretary asked what the boy meant. The sub-consul went to the cell and said that the mayor's office had always kept this sect under control, but now everything had changed because they were trying to take over the Baskerville. Looking at the head of the committee through the bars, Vire said that the lack of education was evident even in the insolent faces of these guys. Being serious, the young man said that one day everyone would be punished, and since he had taken up the case, he would eliminate everyone involved. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the committee members cried and began to beg for forgiveness, saying that they were wrong in their actions and asking for mercy. For the last time, looking at the heads of the committee members, Secretary Chihuahua said it's unlikely the boys' families will sit idly by after learning what happened to them. Insistently addressing the young man, Chihuahua was sure that in the future the boys would not support the projects of the subconsul, and would most likely take revenge on him at any cost. However, Vire said that everything would work out and advised the man not to worry about protesting families because they too are involved in crimes. Looking at the confused secretary, the young subconsul said that if evidence of the family's crimes was needed, he would deliberately create it if it could not be found. Vire knew that soon there would be a global upheaval in the world in which there was a high probability of his participation in the battle, and if that didn't happen, he would enter the academy and leave here. Turning to the guys, the young man remembered all their sins, namely kidnapping and trafficking in women, bribery, blackmail, tax extortion, and elimination of people. The head of the committee replied that they had not done it, and if the subconsul was provided with evidence of their offenses, they would definitely be punished. Smiling evilly, Vire said that the guy was deluded if he thought there was no evidence in the presence of such serious crimes. Desperate, the head of the committee wanted to say something but quickly stopped and did not utter a word because he realized that he had nothing to oppose. Watching him, Vire realized that he was ready to sacrifice his life but would never betray his family. At that moment, a man appeared behind him and addressed the young man. The young subconsul rejoiced at the man's arrival, saying that he had finally arrived, but Secretary Chihuahua was clearly surprised at the appearance of this suspicious man holding a large sack with incomprehensible contents. The mysterious man said that the subconsul's customized order had been fulfilled. When he took out the contents of the bag, Vire saw a lot of gruesome and bloody tools, including saws, knives, picks, and other sharp objects. Turning to the subconsul, the executioner said that in all his 30 years of torture, this was the first time he had seen so many gruesome tools, and Vire replied that these things were not uncommon in the place where he lived. Then the executioner asked the young man if he had lived in hell, and Vire replied that this place was like hell and he could teach the executioner how to use these objects, but he politely refused. Looking at the assortment of tools, the young man thought that he had missed such tools in his past life in the age of destruction for torturing demons. Taking off his jacket, Vire said that the torture could begin, and then the head of the committee was finally convinced that the subconsul would not just let them go. Looking into the eyes of the guys full of fear, the boy asked where they lost all their confidence and stubbornness they showed earlier. Rolling up his shirt sleeves, Vire ordered the boys to be silent, for he wanted to savor the old sensations of torture and proceeded to the gruesome procedures. Soon, rumors of what happened in the committee room quickly spread through the city, and the gang of 7 corrupt and violent idiots were promptly arrested. Everyone was discussing this incident, and given the character of the new subconsul, the residents were sure that the rich offspring were unlikely to be released and would definitely bring shame to their families. Many residents argued that these guys should only get the death penalty after all the atrocities they had committed, but they weren't sure that's what would happen. Some argued that the subconsul would not forgive this and would execute everyone. Others feared that the consequences of executing the heirs could be far from humorous. However, all the townspeople agreed that this incident was a power play between the new politician and the local rich, and if they bowed their heads once, it would all be over. As the townspeople had anticipated, soon after, Mang Blang, Fari, Lobi, Chanel, Fagu, Eros, and Fra offered their sincere apologies to the new subconsul. Local officials also bowed to subconsul Vire, offering him compensation for the harm he had caused. Everyone was sure that thus the 7 heirs were released safely after listening to their fathers screaming at home. However, the townspeople thought so at first until they saw the 7 heads of the heirs of these families in the middle of the central square of Underdog City. All the heads were soaked in cinnamon and had contorted facial expressions showing the horrible hellish pain they felt until their last breath. A warning hanging over their heads detailed all the kinds of tortures performed on them, which shocked all the inhabitants with their sophistication. After finishing the case, Vire said that this law had always existed, so there was nothing surprising in such a massacre of disorderly people. However, the very fact of punishing known aristocrats would cause changes, and upon hearing the declaration of war, the remaining aristocrats would spring into action. The secretary was not prepared to hear that if a confrontation between politicians and aristocrats began, a bloody wind would blow on Underdog in the future. Vire turned and looked at Chihuahua and said that he should be worried because he would be taking part in his next covert operation soon. That very moment came, and putting a mask over his face, the secretary whispered, asking Vire if they were really on a covert operation now. Then the young subconsul, also undercover, asked Chihuahua if he didn't trust him, and the man said that wasn't the point. The man looked at the boy with a frightened look and doubted the rightness of such an action because their task was very dangerous, and he was worried about him. Secretary Chihuahua was worried about the young sub-consul being put in an iron cage like some wild animal. Soon, the boy was taken to a place run by fallen and vile aristocrats who brought slaves and kidnapped people to sell. The worst part was that Mr. Vire himself had set himself up to be sold as a slave to one of the aristocrats. Somewhere on the outskirts of the city of Underdog, there was a huge circle tent hidden from the eyes of ordinary people, near which luxurious carriages began to gather. Today was the opening day of the slave trade, which of course the Baskerville had not been told about, and the local commodity was kidnapped barbarian nobles and commoners. In the tent, the guests of honor were greeted by a man dressed in a clown costume who solemnly welcomed everyone to a place called the circus. When he approached the clown, Chihuahua gave him his ticket on which the purpose of the visit was indicated, and from his handwriting, the clown determined that the man was from the Mang Blang family. A slightly nervous Chihuahua confirmed what was written, saying that he had come to sell the slave who was behind his back. The clown was concerned because people from this family bought slaves in bulk, thinking that someone was not to their liking, to which Chihuahua replied that he was always satisfied with the goods bought here. Upon seeing the male slave, the clown said that such a rare and unusual specimen with black hair and red eyes he would be able to sell at a great price. Accepting this bid, the clown invited Mr. Chihuahua Mang Blang to come inside and wished him a fun time at the circus watching the auction. Soon, the whole hall was filled with aristocrats, and positioned in the center of the stage, the clown leading the event began his performance, addressing the audience. At that moment, the guests were discussing who liked which slaves because some wanted a slave with a tragic fate, some wanted a beautiful slave, and some liked kidnapped people. In a loud stage voice, the clown announced that this auction featured an unusual item that had been secretly stolen from the hunters of the Baskerville family. This item turned out to be a huge hell bison nicknamed Murcielago, who had 19 hearts and was a top-level monster. In this monster were valuable skin, flesh, bones, and organs, all of which had a high value, and the starting price of the auction was the sum of 100 million gold. Interested guests began to make bets, breaking each more and more sum because many wanted to possess such a precious commodity. Upon hearing the largest unbeatable sum of 250 million gold, the clown struck his hammer and announced that the lot had been sold to the man in question. Then came the next slaves for whom the nefarious aristocrats were vying, throwing their money in all directions and making bets, trying to snatch their prey. Suddenly, a man came up to the clown asking to sell another lot, and upon learning what the item was, the clown was surprised and said that he did not give guarantees but would try to interest buyers. Turning to the guests, the clown began to tell about this special and rare commodity which was brought by slave traders from the depths of the wild jungle. This commodity turned out to be a young barbarian girl who came from a fearsome and strong fighting tribe from the jungles of the Red-Black Mountain called the Balik. The girl glared angrily and hatefully at all these vile people while the clown offered to ransom and test his taming skills on this fierce slave. Hearing the incomprehensible language and screams of the savage, the guests could not understand why to sell such goods, but the clown still risked to start the auction with the sum of 5 million. However, none of the guests were willing to bid in favor of this lot, and realizing this difficult situation, the host offered a lower bid of 3 million. Once again not seeing the interest of the guests, the clown said that he would give them 1 million if they would make at least a minimum bid for this girl, but the audience did not give in even to such a provocation and began to get bored and show their indignation at the lack of interesting merchandise. Realizing that the lot was not to sell, the clown told his huge assistant to get rid of the girl Varvara and to deliver to the stage only verified goods. At this point, the girl became enraged and began to shout something in her own language and tried to get out of the shackles that were restraining her body, but the huge executioner and the clown's assistant quickly pacified the slave with a powerful blow, after which she instantly lost consciousness. While the executioner was carrying the girl away on his back, the clown apologized for the misunderstanding to the audience and said it was time for the next item. Then the auction with the best items began, and to the guests brought out a young Vire, who passed by the executioner and the girl Varvara. One of the aristocratic ladies present immediately caught sight of the merchandise that had just been delivered to the stage and was struck by the fact that in front of the nefarious rich men appeared a young handsome young man with beautiful long black hair, an athletic build, and bright red eyes. The clown immediately approached the young man and began to tell him about the item, saying that it was very rare and initially docile, so it would not require much training. Without listening to the clown, the lady who liked Vire immediately made a bet of 600 million, which the clown was very happy about because not having had time to specify the starting amount had already heard the bet. Suddenly, another guest announced a bid of 800 million, and the angry lady yelled at the one because she did not understand why such a handsome young man needed a man, while the man replied that he needed the young man as a gladiator and clarified relations with the aristocrat. Another guest outbid him by offering 900 million. Suddenly, one of the guests picked up the plate with his number and said that he was offering 6 billion for this slave. The clown looked at him for a moment and froze because he did not expect to hear such a huge sum for this young slave. Catching a wave of excitement, the clown began to ask who could offer more, but all the guests were silent. Turning around and looking at the man who made the last bet, the aristocrats immediately recognized that this man was Baron Gambino of Zitanit, with his young assistant standing behind him. There were rumors among the nobles that the vile man had recently risen by absorbing underground funds. Looking at the Baron's aide, he asked if he had made too big a bet, to which Gambino replied that he would resell the young man in the capital at twice the price. Doubting the correctness of the Baron's actions, the girl said that it was too large a sum and that he would be suitable for sale as he matured. Gambino ordered Cindy to shut up, for he had taken the girl and when she had no place to go, so she must not look down on her master. In the end, no one offered a higher amount, and the clown said that the customer number 99, Baron Gambino, gets the right to own this unique product. When Vire was brought to the Baron, the man saw that the young man looked even better up close and said that he had prepared a couple of games for them to try out his goods. After these words, the young subconsul raised his hands to the man's face, and Gambino was surprised and asked the young man if he wanted the shackles removed. Replying to the Baron that there was no need, Vire broke the strong chains with his hands in a second and said he would gladly play with the man. Seeing this, Cindy, standing behind Baron Gambino, was frightened and surprised at such strength of such a young boy. Without hesitation, Vire struck Baron Gambino with a powerful blow, and he flew backward, blowing everything around him to smithereens. Landing on the floor, the man coughed and heard a question from a boy who asked if the Baron liked this game called Spear and Shield. Approaching Gambino and clutching tightly at his flesh, the young subconsul said that in this game he would be the spear and the man the shield, and if the latter held out, he would win. Tears sprang from the Baron's eyes from the infernal pain, and he screamed frantically, begging his assistant Cindy to call the guards, but she froze in place in fear. Before she could even move from her seat, the girl saw the man fall silent in an instant, and his eyes ceased to emit life energy. Then the young man slowly took off his wig and exposed his real face, and then Cindy immediately realized that subconsul Vire van Baskerville stood before her. All the guests of the circus were horrified to realize that the subconsul himself had come here under the guise of a slave, and the secretary realized that the young man would again punish everyone with extreme cruelty. After looking at these vile aristocrats, Vire said that this place was aptly named circus since it housed so many clowns. Anticipating a taste of further revenge, the young subconsul said that all present were unlikely to return home unharmed. Realizing that their secret society was caught off guard, the clown organizer decided to act quickly and decisively because he did not care that the young man turned out to be a subconsul. Pointing his finger at Vire, the clown said it didn't matter who the boy was and ordered his minions to eliminate him because he was completely unarmed. Immediately following the organizer's order, the armed fighters rushed to attack the young man to eliminate him as soon as possible. However, at that moment, Vire summoned and released the demonic sword bug from his hand, showing that he was not unarmed. Ahead of his opponents, the young subconsul eliminated all three men in a flash, stripping them of their heads with a single blow. Upon seeing what had happened, the clown noticed the red viscous aura exuding from the young subconsul and suspected something was wrong. Immediately after the fallen trio, the executioner entered the fray, spinning his metal sphere on a chain, but Vire didn't keep the man waiting long. Rushing towards him, sneaking up to the metal sphere, the young man immediately channeled his power to disarm this formidable big guy. In the next instant, Vire shattered the metal sphere and eliminated the creepy executioner, thus letting everyone know that he was a graduate level to be an alumnist at such an age. Even as Baskerville was quite unusual, for alumni are the best weapons representing the strength of a country. Realizing that with such an opponent, victory was not seen, the clown decided to act with more vile methods, using for this the next standing chihuahua, who supported the young man. Laughing evilly, the clown turned his attention to himself and ordered Vire to look away from the fight and look in his direction. The young man turned around and saw his secretary being held hostage by the clown, who ordered him to surrender or his employee would be in trouble. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Vire stopped fighting at that second and hid his demonic sword back in his hand. Being extremely frightened, the secretary approached the young subconsul, saying he was fine and asked that the young man be careful. The clown ordered him to shut up because he was at a disadvantage, and the man replied that he would rather suffer than frame his boss. Hearing Chihuahua's words, Vire laughed out loud and said he knew of his loyal secretary's boundless loyalty. Then the young subconsul said that in leaving the Baskerville mansion, He had received a hidden card in the form of a whistle from the head of Hugo, which was now fastened to his leg. The secretary immediately recognized this whistle and understood everything, but the clown didn't know what the object was and anxiously asked what the young man was going to do with it. Bringing the whistle to his face, Vire blew it with all his might, and a loud shrill sound spread throughout the tent. Not expecting such a strong and nasty sound from a small whistle, all the aristocrats instantly covered their ears to avoid hearing it. The clown and Chihuahua continued to stare at the young man and stood motionless, waiting for what would follow. After the piercing whistle, having finished blowing the whistle, the young subconsul took it away from his face and froze in anticipation of further actions that were bound to take place. Not noticing any immediate change, the clown haughtily told Vire that this dude could only frighten others with its ugly sound. Before he could finish his speech about how the guy had failed to do anything despite the fact that he was a graduate, the clown was silent because a sharp sword blade pierced his throat. In the same second, the clown fell breathlessly to the floor at the hands of a mysterious cloaked man standing behind him. Secretary Chihuahua cried out in surprise that his assailant, who had just threatened his life, was no longer breathing and that the mysterious man had hidden his sword. Suddenly, one of the clown's henchmen and his accomplice rushed to attack the cloaked man to avenge their fallen superior. However, the stranger did not even budge and riddled the body of the male assailant with little effort. All the rest of the clown's accomplices froze in fear, not expecting to see such a gruesome massacre of their friend and worrying for their lives. The same moment, a huge number of warriors dressed in the same cloaks as the man who had eliminated the clown hurriedly entered the tent. The swordsmen spread out all around and surrounded all the nefarious aristocrats in this circus. The clown's accomplices began to suspect who all these swordsmen might be, and if it turned out to be true, they would not be spared. Recognizing the sign in the shape of fangs, Cindy realized that this was the most ferocious unit in the entire empire, consisting of a large number of knights. The swordsman who had suddenly crept up behind her was just one of the members of the Baskerville KN squad called Pitbull. Turning around and looking at the man in horror, Cindy couldn't believe she was going to the other side of the world in such a creepy place. But at that moment, Vire blocked the knight's path and covered the girl with himself, ordering him to let her live but detain her. In the same second, the man drew back from Vire and knelt before the young SUBC consul, showing his submission and reverence. Vire then gave orders to eliminate all other guests but not to touch those lying still, but not to spare those at the slightest movement of the body. Remembering Hugo's words, the young man thought that he had paid great attention to military power, and was glad that he had gotten a Pitbull squad for his request. A squad of knights immediately began to eliminate the vile and corrupt aristocrats on Vire's orders, and one of the guests fell to the floor and decided to wait it out and then escape. But suddenly, one of the swordsmen noticed him and immediately approached, looking at him with an intimidating, piercing gaze. Hoping for mercy from the knight, the aristocrat held out his hands to the knight and asked him to cuff him. However, the swordsman replied that they did not carry handcuffs and immediately attacked the man, stripping him of both legs so that he could not escape. Soon, a huge man with a cigar in his teeth came up to Vire and asked him if he liked his pit bulls, to which the young man replied that he was very pleased with the swordsman. The man said that he could always ask for help because he was VK's uncle and the captain of the night squad, and his name was Boston Terrier. Boston Terrier realized why his brother Hugo was so interested in the young man, for Vire, at his 15 years, was very clever and very violent in his actions. Putting his hand on his nephew's head, the man suggested that he join the Pitbulls, but the young SUBC consul was slow to respond and said he would think about it. Before he knew it, Boston Terrier saw the boy who said he had urgent business to attend to and had to go. After realizing that the young man had the guts to ignore his uncle, the man realized that he really wanted to get Vire into his Pitbull collection. After escaping from his annoying uncle, the young man went into a room where there were many cages in which slaves were kept until they were sold. Soon, Vire saw a huge safe with noblemen's money that he was going to return to the mayor's office for tax security, reasoning that he didn't feel like contributing to the Baskervilles' property. The young man noticed a cage that was covered with a thick cloth. Realizing that he had come to the warehouse for another reason, the boy was still overcome with interest and removed the cloth from the cage to see what was there. In the cage lay a barbarian girl who had never been able to sell at auction and who was covered in scars and was in a semi-conscious, exhausted state. Looking at the victim of the vile merchants, Vire realized that the girl had been badly beaten and was not in the best condition. Taking out a vial of red liquid from his belt, the young man said that the girl was very lucky because he would give her a restorative potion. The young SUBC consul opened the vessel and began to pour the potion into the girl's mouth so that she could drink a little to heal and regain consciousness. Soon, the girl's body was saturated with the potion and began to radiate life energy, which was a good sign. Suddenly opening her eyes, the girl didn't realize what had happened because her last memory was of standing at an auction in front of aristocrats. When she saw the young man in front of her, she recoiled, fearing for the safety of her life. Not expecting such a reaction from the girl, Vire asked her what she was so afraid of. After opening the cage, Vire stepped aside and turned to the stranger, speaking a phrase in the barbarian language, telling her to get out of here as soon as possible. The girl looked at the young man with apprehension and misunderstanding, for it was surprising that a man not of their kind knew the language of the barbarians, and opened the way for her. Remembering that he had learned the language of the barbarians at a basic level while fighting those in his past life, Vire once again ordered the girl to get out of here. Unexpectedly, the girl looked him in the eyes with confidence and began to tell him something in her own language, but he replied that he did not know their language at that level. Then, leaving the cage, the girl headed for the exit while continuing to look with interest at her savior. Then she paused for a moment and uttered one last phrase in her own language, obviously not quite understanding the meaning of these words. Vire looked after the stranger and said that he would consider her words as gratitude. Finally left alone in this room, Vire continued his search, and finding what he had come for, he removed the cloth from this important commodity. Beneath the cloth was the breathless body of Murcielago, who for the boy's benefit had not yet been butchered and thus could take whatever he needed. Releasing Beelzebub from his hand, the young man said that it had been a long time since they had had a top-level monster, and that it was time to start eating and savoring the monster's blood. Soon everyone was talking about the young SUBC consul who instantly crushed criminal organizations whose members were stripped of their limbs and taken to prisons. Also, on that day, the burning mansion that housed the huge devil's lair of the fallen aristocrats of Underdog City was burned to the ground. The heads of all the VIP visitors to this creepy lair were put on display in the town square, and people became more vigilant about criminal activity. At the same time, 7 families who had previously lost their heirs wrote complaints to the government, whose response was categorical. As the head of the city's government, Vire replied to the 7 families that the only consequence for all criminals involved in the slave trade would be execution. The families' protests stopped when all their accounts came to light, which were handed over for investigation to the Baskerville, who had implicated the imperial family in the affair. As a result, the heads of the families personally went to the government, where they had to beg for forgiveness from the man who had previously eliminated all their sons. Looking at the heads of the 7 families, Vire said that all the black ledgers from the burning mansion had already been searched thoroughly. On this basis, all 7 families, without exception, would be subject to requisition of property under the constitution of the Baskerville Dominion. At last, the young SUBC consul looked angrily at the heads of families and said that the 3 families who had committed treason against the Baskerville were sentenced to execution. Since these harsh reforms, the city of Underdog has bathed in the blood of traitors and has come to a prosperous place where Vire's good reputation among the citizens has grown day by day. On one such workday, the young SUBC consul's secretary, Chihuahua, entered the young man's office and suggested that he take a break and have a cup of coffee. Vire replied that it was not necessary to do so, but the secretary said that he expressed his personal gratitude because he had saved him on the day of the covert operation. The young man jokingly said that coffee was too small a price to pay for salvation. He smiled and replied that he had added 2 spoonfuls of cream and 2 lumps of sugar. The secretary then asked how the young man's manuscript training was going, and Vire asked to see it. Chihuahua looked at the young man's manuscript and said that despite his recent start in training, he was making great progress and writing beautifully.